There's an on.
Oh, hi. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Judy.
Judy.
You don't need to do
Well, I'm waiting for the GM,
No, the meters are being read.
Bertrand, and Connor's just come to me with the request. I don't ever see it. So, yeah.
it. It was very sweet of you.
It's all recorded, and then once an hour census collects the data and does an FTP transfer to our server. And it's a second copy, so it's the yeah, they're not selling those. Yeah. I'm glad you noticed that.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking.
Yeah, and we're going to need a place on the website to post it if it's down, so people don't wonder if they're what's going on. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the special meeting of the Kirkwood Meadows Public Utility District. Today is Saturday, January 17th, and the time is 8 o'clock. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Michael, do you have some announcements?
I do. Welcome to the Kirkwood Meadows Public Utility District Special Board Meeting. This meeting is fed live over the internet, and the public can view this meeting by going to our website and following the appropriate link. If the public would like to make a comment or ask a question, please email msharp@kmpud.com and the board will respond. We'd like to congratulate and acknowledge Lynn Morgan, our Amador County Supervisor, who's here with us today. We'd like to acknowledge that Michelle Gamble, our project manager for the Outlet project with RCI, is with us today. And our electrical engineer, Dave Rightly with Exponential Engineering, is on the telephone. Thank you. And
Welcome, Lynn. Congratulations.
Thank you
Look forward to
very
working with you. Peter, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Rickard? Here. Andy? Absent. Grady?
Here.
Dornbrook here, and Epstein here. Okay. 4 to 5.
So item 4 is oral communication, public input. It's the opportunity for members of the public to address the board on non-agenda items relating to district business. No action can be taken by the board on matters not appearing on the agenda. Does anybody have anything they'd like to raise at this point in time?
Actually,
Lynn?
sure. I'm really pleased to be here, and I continue to be thrilled about living close to this beautiful resort area and in this county, and the fact that it's in my district is even more important to me. I really want to invite all of you and anybody that has issues with Amador County to please contact me. And just one issue that I'm going to maybe, I'm not trying to cause trouble here, but I'm just going to put out on the table. If anybody would like to discuss the fact that you've got some roads here that are owned by Amador County that apparently the county doesn't maintain. And I realize there are pros and cons to that, but if that situation needs to be looked into or changed, I'm happy to facilitate that. And I had looked into how much the Amador County property taxes are paid by people in Kirkwood, and it's actually over 2%. It's almost 3% of the total Amador County taxes. So, I think it's important that you feel you're getting some measure of that in return, but from county services. So please think about those things and please contact me.
And talk about the general plan.
Oh yes, and the biggest issue the board is working on right now is the update, finally, of our county general plan. And I would really encourage all of you to look at it. It's available online. It's available at libraries, mostly further down. But it's about 2,000 pages of both general plan, implementation plan, and draft environmental impact report. And what the board is going to be holding a meeting next Tuesday night, the 20th, in the supervisors' chambers to accept public comments on that draft EIR. It's been a challenge for me to sit down and go through, the draft EIR, but there are some things in there that I think are really important. And let me even point out that there are nearly 30 issues that they refer to as SU, substantial unmitigable. And there are some explanations for that status, but those are the things I'm really going to be focusing on this weekend in case I've got questions about them, and I really encourage you folks to do the same. So please come to the meeting. Also, I'm holding a, frankly, I tried to convince the CAO, Chuck Eiley, our Chief Administrative Officer, to allow me to have Susan Grijalva, who's the Director of Planning in the county, to come to a special meeting up country. I tried to see if she could do it to the Upcountry Community Council in Buckhorn, but the county said no. And so I have been, it was volunteered to me, a really important land use lawyer and someone who's been involved in the county general plans in the past is going to be giving us, anybody who comes, a special presentation on Wednesday night, the 21st, at the Veterans Memorial Hall in Buckhorn. And so I referred to that as my first town hall meeting. And I think it'll be a great opportunity to ask questions and get really good direct answers. So please come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I just make a request to Michael? Not that I want you to go through 2,000 pages of a general plan document, but I think it would be good if we knew the high points that might affect Kirkwood and bring it to the planning committee.
Yeah,
To see
we'll
if-
do a search to see what, what impacts it has on Kirkwood, and if they're noteworthy, I'll definitely attend either of those meetings.
Yeah, and I don't want to just focus on Kirkwood in general, but for us,
Of course.
we should know what is and isn't.
And when I do my weekend review, I will keep that in mind also.
Great, and if you, if you see something that you think that I should be aware of, either email me or contact me.
Absolutely.
I would really appreciate that.
Yes.
I guess the only thing I'd like to add is, having done a major project with the county down in Bear River, we appreciate the support that we got. And
Good.
we appreciate that half of the road got repaid
Great. Wonderful.
at no cost to you.
Any other public input? Moving on to item 5, which is correction to the agenda or consent calendar. Does anybody have any?
Staff would like to pull item 8D4, scope of work for exponential engineering, from the agenda.
8E4.
84.
Any others? So at this point, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the consent calendar.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. So we'll move on to there are no consent items brought forward for separate discussion, so we'll move on to new and unfinished business action items. Agenda 8A is discussion of possible action regarding the final issues associated with the Out Valley Power Line project. Manager Sharp, and welcome, Michelle. Yep.
So today, we're closing out the Out Valley project, but actually it'll come in 13 parts. So that seems like an increase, and it certainly is. We're going to talk about the closeout update, station service update. We'll talk about a change order that's before the board, the overall cost, remaining risks, the cash flow for the reserve, the powerhouse depreciation study, O&M for the project, an O&M contract with Wilson, an O&M contract with RCI, load dependent start-stop, system impact study, and cost to date and a preliminary budget for the switch station, and then switch station proposals. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michelle to start off with closeout and completion of the Out Valley project.
Well, good morning. The number of items may have increased, but the length of my presentation is significantly shorter than it normally is. So we continue to move with all of the contract closeout documents. We've been working with the contractors on getting all of the final pay requests, and what you have before you, one of the other items is the final change order that I brought up at the last board meeting for the slurry reconciliation for the underground, and that should be the last change order on wood, that we have before you. Once we get the waivers from all the contractors and their subcontractors, then we'll be able to process the final paperwork. We have all of the contractors on notification, and we've asked for the collection of those waivers. We can't release the retention until we have those waivers and we make sure that there's no outstanding issues between the subcontractors and their contractors. We are working on the final record drawings with Exponential, and we have some final miscellaneous, minor paperwork items that we're working on, but everything else is proceeding with the project closeout as anticipated. I'll roll right into the station service update. That's one of the outstanding items we have related to construction. As you're aware, we've gone through and our contractor has completed all of the PG&E punch list items at the station service. Unfortunately, the time that they completed that, we ended up having some weather, and the site has been inaccessible through normal vehicular traffic. Amador County's inspectors are unable to get up there through the access roads, and we're in a situation right now that the district staff checked the road out yesterday, I believe it was, or day before yesterday. There's too much snow on the road to get a regular pickup truck up there, but there's not enough snow on the road to run a snowmobile up there, so it's one of those situations where you would have to hike in. So we haven't been able to get the Amador County inspector up there on site. I've met with PG&E. They still have to do their final inspection. They are trying to determine whether they can get their inspectors on site before the county inspector goes up there. We'd like to be able to check that off the list at least. And then once we get the final county inspection, we'll be able to set the meter and energize the station service. One of the other outstanding items with the backup station service is also the agreement with PG&E. There's a cost associated with that. They've sent us an invoice, and typical to the invoices that we get from PG&E, it has a dollar amount on it, but no supporting documentation. So I've had several conversations with PG&E requesting supporting documentation as to how they came up with their numbers, and I followed up with them again last week, and I have yet to receive anything. They've indicated that they are working on it, and we've told them that we're not going to recommend payment of that invoice until we understand what all of those dollar amounts are on that invoice. So that's where we are with essentially the project closeout and the backup station service items. And so before I move on to Caltrans, were there any questions about those items?
Questions from the board or the audience?
We are going to get into how much that invoice is, or, I mean, when we talk about costs, this is going to come up.
The preliminary cost of the station service
No,
from
for
PG&E.
The PG&E invoice.
Yeah, well, they sent us an invoice of $57,000 for a minimal amount of work. We're producing chronological backup as far as, how this transpired and what work was done by what. So we're refuting that amount, and we'll bring it back to the board. But right now, it's nowhere near final. And their numbers come down substantially with careful scrutiny. And also, so we tried to get out to KM Green in a truck, and we got to the first pole, or actually pole 37, right there next to the lake. I do believe we could keep up there if we went through the backside and actually drove up through Salt Springs. That's the sunny side over there. So we're going to look into, possibly accessing it with PG&E and possibly Amador County inspectors through that backside. It's a much longer drive, but it'll get us there so we can complete the project.
Another question?
No.
Okay. Why don't you keep going, Michelle?
Okay. Last week, we received an email from Caltrans regarding two issues that they have noted along 88 in areas that we worked in both in 2013 and 2014. One issue deals with the condition of the pavement, some of the paving that was done at the end of the season last year, and then the other issue has to deal with some water that is migrating up through the pavement and ending up surfacing on the road and creating an icy condition. had conversations with Q&D. I've had a meeting with Q&D. They've already been on site last week. They've looked at the paving. They are bringing their paving supplier, their pavement supplier out on site on Monday. It appears that they have an issue with the oil that was used. We used a Caltrans specification, but for some reason, the binder didn't adhere to the aggregate the way that it should have. And so between Q&D and their subcontractor, they're coming up with a course of action as far as what they want to present to Caltrans. It is a warranty item, so at this point we do not anticipate any cost to the district for any of the repairs of the pavement that will be done, including if they had to come back and completely redo that whole pavement section. That's something that we paid for and anticipated to have a pavement patch that had a very long useful life, and getting partway through one winter is not anticipated. So they're also working with Caltrans regarding any sort of interim measures, any pothole repairs that need to be done along the patch, just to make sure that we have a safe road along 88 over the winter. So that's being very actively pursued. The other item, as we get between Sheeler Lake and Plasses, when we were constructing, we actually encountered one of the French drains that we encountered at other locations along the trench section. We had the Caltrans inspector out on site. He provided direction as far as how they wanted to see us address that problem. We addressed it back in 2013. In the winter of 2013, we were not notified of any concerns. But I said last week we were notified by Caltrans that there was an icing issue. What they believe is happening is that there is some sort of plug in that French drain pipe, and it's causing water to back up, and then it hits our concrete slurry that we were directed to put into the trench. It goes down the hill, and then it surfaces along our trench seam and then flows across the road. So Caltrans has had some people out in the field, and they have presented to us what they would like to see done as a remedy. We've had conversations with Q&D as well. Monday morning, I'm supposed to have a cost from Q&D to do these repairs. There's two areas that Caltrans would like some additional work done. Essentially, it would be to excavate down where the French drain is, notch out the slurry that we had placed, and then backfill with a gravel permeable material, and then repave. Until we expose that area, it's hard to tell what exactly is happening. Caltrans has TV'd the French drain, is my understanding, and they did see a blockage, so there is a section of perforated metal pipe that would need to be replaced. Everything from what the information I've been provided, everything is from the fog line to the edge of the road, so it's a small section, but it's the way that the road is cross-sloped in that area, and it's a very shady area around a curve. It's causing some issues. So we're anticipating getting some costs from Q&D. If Q&D, if their cost is, you know, I don't know what their cost is going to be, but we'll look at that. If Q&D can't perform the work, Caltrans has an emergency contractor ready, and that they would perform the work. So.
Is that also a warranty item?
Okay.
Bob asked if
Is
that's
that a
also.
warranty item also?
That would likely not be a warranty item. The reason being is that Q&D constructed the trench line per the detail. It's one of those issues where we had Caltrans on site, we encountered this, we addressed it with them to the degree that we thought it needed to be addressed with their direction, and we've had another issue surface.
Okay. So we would, if possibly, pay for it and then make a claim against Caltrans?
Those discussions would have to occur, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we've reviewed this with the general counsel, and his thought is that it should get repaired as quickly as possible because it's a safety issue,
Right.
and then work out the details afterwards.
I agree.
You know, one, it was built to specifications, and two, it didn't cause a problem in 13-14 season. So that's really interesting that it didn't. It was constructed in 2013 summer, and then all winter long, there was no problem, and then now this winter, there's a problem with it. So whether that's a construction defect or what is yet to be determined. It could be found through construction as well. Once you dig it up, you know, there's a marmot in the PMP or whatever it might be.
So for what period of time do we have liability for Highway 88? I mean, at some point, do they sign off on it and our liability goes away?
Well, they're going to have inspectors on site during this repair work, and they produce this document that's in
Right.
front of you that's telling us how to repair it. So once we do it to their repair specifications, I feel our liability goes away as well.
And these are the only two areas that we have any extended liability?
These are the only two areas that are shown up at this point.
Well, what if something pops up next year? I mean, can they still come back and blame us?
Yeah, whether we're liable or not at that point after 3 years of construction is a good question.
So there's no definition in terms of after a certain amount of time, our liability goes away?
I don't know if there is in the encroachment permit as far as, there's a certain amount of implied warranty, and then, after a certain amount of time, the courts would look at it as saying, well, it hasn't been a problem for 2 or 3 years, and now you're saying that problem caused it. It's all a reasonableness issue, I believe. But I don't think there's anything in the encroachment permit that specifically says after 5 years you're free. I know that if they ever want to move the road, that we're liable for moving the pipe as well, the conduit as well.
Right,
and
I understand that.
Right, that's in perpetuity.
Just another twist.
Any other comments, questions on this topic?
Staff needs action from the board in that, as noted, this is a safety issue, and the district needs to respond and get this corrected, and then go after. And we would like authorization for the general manager and the president of the board to authorize an expenditure of up to $45,000 to correct the situation. I think that's a conservative estimate, but I want to be conservative going into this. We'll try to keep these costs down, but first we need to repair it, and then we need to figure out what's the cause.
Is it the consensus of the board?
Yeah, no, I agree, it's gotta be done for safety purposes, but I do think we need to be reasonably aggressive, I guess, in recovering costs if in fact what was done was in accord with Caltrans direction.
I agree with that, and that I'd rather see KMPUD do this unless staff or Michelle feels otherwise.
I would prefer to have Q&D. I think we would be able to keep the cost down
Sure.
using them.
So do you need a motion, or is that?
I do.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to move that these repairs proceed as quickly as possible, and then the cost issues be resolved subsequently.
So is that a motion for
That's-
staff to do it up to $45,000 in consultation with the president?
Correct.
Second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So we'll move on to 8B. KMPUD construction quantities reconciliation for various underground materials, slurry, and construction units. Are you prepared for this one, or should we?
Prepared. At the December meeting, I indicated that the only outstanding item that we had with any of the quantities reconciliation was the slurry quantity reconciliation. And I indicated to the board at that time that amount could go as high as about $177,000, just due to the magnitude of the slurry and the additional work that we had to do in the Caltrans right away. While I'm pleased to tell you what the final dollar amount is, it's still significant. We were able to negotiate with Q&D that dollar amount down to $94,142.97. So it was a significant reduction that we were able to negotiate. So what I have before you is a change order for that final slurry reconciliation. I will say that when I've gone back and looked at the slurry quantities, we had an additional 600 and just under 675 cubic yards of slurry that was placed along the project area. Of that, approximately just under 400 cubic yards of that was for additional work that we did in the Caltrans right-of-way. The balance of that slurry quantity was for areas where Q&D encountered rocks, or we had sloughing soils, which led to a widening of the trench section, and we had agreed on prior to even starting construction that in those situations we would pay the contractor for the actual slurry quantities that they used. So, so I felt that that was an appropriate and legitimate quantity of slurry that we ended up paying Q&D for. Also included on the change was an item that I had missed with the quantities reconciliation that I presented in December. As we were constructing along from Silver Lake into Kirkwood, Volcano had approached us, and typically we had installed 2 conduits for Volcano along those sections. They had asked us for a 3rd conduit, and Q&D said that they would place that 3rd conduit for an extra $1 per foot, and Volcano had agreed to pay for that. So this additional item is it's $12,047. It's a pass-through. It's money that we will pay Q&D under the contract, but we have already invoiced Volcano for that amount. And I did want to, actually, I did neglect to indicate, we have invoiced Volcano for all of the work that we did on their behalf. We submitted an invoice to Volcano for $234,378.20. So those are funds that will be coming back to the district as reimbursement.
Michelle, at least before I can completely digest the $94,000, on the cost spreadsheet, we're at $37.9 million now. Is that now sort of net of all the puts and takes, these change orders, the change in the ITCC from 34% to 22%, and so on? So in other words, when I look at this $37.9 million, I can be confident that that includes this $94,000. It includes the anticipated reimbursement from Volcano. It includes the change in the ITCC and so on.
So the forecast that's in front of you today does include the reduction in the ITCC tax. It does not include this 94. This came in extremely late and didn't make it to the Alpine forecast.
But didn't this include the 177 earlier?
No, it didn't. It was under negotiation, so it did not. Right now it has a figure of 75, which has actually been already expensed.
Which is actually what I didn't hear you.
Has already been expensed, so this does not include the 94,000. So the 97, 924 does not include the 94 that Michelle's speaking of.
Okay. So we're up in over 38 million now. Well, I mean, it's, right, I mean, this is our contract. We have, and you've negotiated it, and it seems like the fair thing to do. We're not happy about the bottom line. But.
Any other comments, questions from the board or audience?
Staff has reviewed this change order and recommends board approval.
Okay, well, I'll make the motion that we approve the change order.
Second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
So we'll move on to 8C, which is continued discussion and possible action regarding the current outbound cost estimate. And so this is Manager Sharp and Jill Campbell. Thank you, Michelle.
We're going to start with Valley Financial Risks. As Director Urquhart mentioned, we actually were at over 38 at the last meeting. We dropped to 37. Now we're back up to 38. One of the reasons for this this change, and that we were able to drop to 37, is that as we enter into the true-up phase of the negotiation with PG&E, PG&E has acknowledged that the ITCC rate for the entire project will be at 22%, which will be a savings of approximately $111,000, which is reflected in the Out Valley. So that's exceptionally good news. Additionally, staff is questioning why the district should be responsible for 100% of the O&M costs for the upgrade of the substations at Salt Springs and Tiger Creek. Since they already had protection between the two devices originally, why would the addition of a third, all of those construction costs be 100% our O&M cost? Similar to the replacement of the 12 kV line, it was there, it's existing, we upgraded it, it should still be their maintenance responsibility. So we're coming back and asking that the O&M charge actually be decreased to that we only pay for our portion of the relay upgrades, which would be 1/3 of those costs. I've had conversations with PG&E and they understand our position. If we're successful in this, this could mean, this could save the district somewhere around $82,000 annually for the rest of time. So this is a big issue and we're pursuing it. We were successful in other issues on the O&M, so we're hopeful that we can be successful in this as well. As we discussed, the final costs for the station service, we actually don't know what those final costs will be, but we're in negotiations with that. So is there any questions on remaining financial risks?
Well, let's see, I can't see it. So it's $4.5 million is what the current estimate is for the PG&E costs, right? How much can that go up or down? Do we have a sense of what the range is from 4.5 to 4 million?
You mean on their true-up?
Yeah.
Yeah, when we true this up, I mean, what's the up and down side of this 4,524,000? Do we have a sense?
The 4 million does not include some of the previous costs, actually. It's a higher number than that. You know, right now, the sense from PG&E is that we're close and that they're not forecasting any jumps like they saw in October of 2012. So I feel that we're close to their estimate at this point. So I don't think that this is a large financial risk at this point.
And is that number consistent with what we agreed when we met with them in Sacramento in June?
Yes, I mean, it's gone up by small amounts for here and there, and station service is not included in that. But yeah, it's consistent with the same principles that we decided on in June. So with that, I'm going to let Jill go over to the Out Valley financials, the cash, and the depreciation.
Hi. So in the packet is an updated expense forecast. The expense to date has been updated with everything included in up to this consent that was approved. We've also added the sections in ITCC tax, the categories that PG&E will charge ITC. We've already paid them the $512, but that invoice didn't break out exactly what the ITC was for. So in the true up, we'll be sure to make sure that it correlates to each category. This forecast does show that there is $4.7 million remaining to be spent. As mentioned, the $94,000 from Q&D is not included, so that brings that to a little over $4.8 million.
And is there anything else not included, or is that the last thing not included?
Up to what you've seen, that's...
Yeah, that's everything we know.
Well, what about the PG&E costs on the backup station?
They're not included in this number either as far as the station service.
Yeah. So it's another number that's not in there.
On page 10 of the packet, it shows our total costs. Again, $94,000 isn't included in this. So the remaining expense is about, a little bit over 4.8 million. We have just under 4 million remaining in the Russ fund. So currently, our expenses in excess of the loan is now at about 860,000. It's showing 770,000, but if you add in that 94, about 860,000 overpayment.
So that would take our reserve to about 2.4 million, is that correct?
That's correct.
Is there any reason not to draw the 5,000?
No, I just need,
Does it cost more than 5,000 to draw it?
No.
Okay.
get that done.
It's just a remaining miscellaneous piece of the first loan, AA.
Are there any questions on that? Otherwise, I'll go to the depreciation update. As the board is aware, the Russ committee met in December on our powerhouse depreciation study. They did have additional questions, and in the packet on page 11 is district staff's response to those questions. We haven't received any feedback back from Russ since we supplied the answers to these questions. They have not met again since. Howard Barnes had a contact. He was the Russ committee coordinator, Lou Riggs. He retired at the end of 2014. So Ken Solano is the new Russ committee coordinator. Howard Barnes reached out to him this week to see if there was an update. They have not met since, and they are planning to meet within the next 2 weeks to go over our study again. Howard suggested that in anticipation of that meeting, another possible question that could come up would be the useful life of the generators at the powerhouse. So he asked us to reach out to see if we could get information from the manufacturers on useful life. We haven't had a lot of success with that. The manufacturers feel that providing that information could lead to litigation or life warranties. So we've started reaching out to the sellers to see if they can get that information, and we have received a little bit back. Russ hasn't asked us for that, but that's the last question that Howard feels could be asked when they meet again.
Didn't our study that Dave did include information on estimates of useful life?
Yes, but not specifically from
So
Volvo and Cat.
It was the engineer's best estimate?
Yes.
Not something from the manufacturer?
Exactly.
And also from, service reps, like our service reps gave us information. One item came out of the finance committee, which I thought was a good idea from Alan Sapp, is to possibly use testimonials from other users on how long their generators have lasted in the field. I know I personally, or the district has a 40-year-old generator, and it's still working quite well.
Yeah, take a picture of old Betsy,
Yeah,
send it on.
so, yeah, I think that I could actually write a very good testimonial on the life of the generator, because we know how long old Betsy's been around, so.
And that's been being used, right?
On a standby basis.
Okay.
If we were to receive this reduction in the depreciation rate, how quickly would that impact user rates?
That would need to be determined. It would be staff's recommendation that we would wait on any action until after the ski season to see how the ski season goes.
Who makes that decision, Russ or the district, in terms of reducing rates?
Well, that would be, reducing rates would be the board decision.
Okay.
I think we would reverse out the depreciation, the excess depreciation, and then how we apply those funds is up to us,
Okay.
right?
I sort of understand that.
Well, from November 1st, we've been if they rule in our favor, since November 1st, we've been over depreciating. So we would reverse out all of that. That would create funds, and then we would decide how to apply it.
Okay.
The
The
logical
depreciation,
place.
the fund is mandated by Russ, though, but how we deal with it is up to us.
It's up to us, right? I mean,
Okay.
the likely scenario is what you described, but that's
Okay.
our decision.
I thought Howard said we couldn't reverse it out retroactively when he was here last time. Do you remember?
I remember the opposite.
Yeah, I actually do too, but we can verify that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can reverse it out since we put the plan into the Out Valley entity?
Yeah, would be
Yeah,
affected.
we've been over depreciating.
Maybe for Bob, you can probably do this in your head. Is it, am I right in saying that given our current demand for kilowatt hours, is it about $80,000 of reduced expense, not capital, but actual expense, translates about 1 cent per kilowatt hour?
I think it's a little lower. I think it's more like 70,000.
70,000, about
Yeah.
1 cent. So, for example, if Michael's successful in negotiating the O&M on those relays at the other 2 stations, that would be 1 cent.
Yeah, a little over a penny, yeah. Forever.
Forever, that's the big word.
Yeah.
Anything else on Powerhouse depreciation determination update?
We'll bring this back to the board. We hope to have answers on that by the end of this month. So we won't wait for a board meeting. We'll let you know right away.
Moving on to 8D, discussion and possible action related to the district's operations and maintenance of the Out Valley line. Manager Sharp.
Yeah, staff continues to refine our operations and maintenance of the Out Valley line. Pleased to say that the inspections are going well, and we have developed a spreadsheet to actually track these inspections so that we're doing them on a monthly basis and that we can see our progress. Thanks to the use of the snowmobile, and thank the board for allowing that purchase, we were able to access Cane Green. We had the maiden voyage, and then we have used it on the underground line as well through U.S. Forest Service land. Able to, identify some issues. There's a huge tree that's down on U.S. Forest Service land. We've contacted them about moving the tree. They have no issues with that. So it's good to get out there, take a look at our stuff, unbury them, make them accessible for if there was an issue, we'd be able to find them. So our inspections are going well. Talking about the snowmobile, staff has developed a preliminary snowmobile training manual with a sign-off page, which is in your packet for your review and comment. So I think that's a good effort as far as making sure that we're using that snowmobile in an effective and safe way. I was one of the first people that drove it. It was fun for about 10 minutes, and then it becomes a form of transportation. You can only go so fast, and it's a utility vehicle. So the first 10 minutes is great. So moving on, as the district learned in December, we need to have adequate resources in case of an emergency is extremely needed. PG&E is also anxious to see that the district has appropriate resources. To that end, we have been working on a maintenance service agreement with Wilson Construction, who built the overhead and the substation lines. And in your pack is an agreement with Wilson, the maintenance and service agreement with Wilson Construction. This agreement is only done through task order, which has to be signed by the general manager. It's on a T&M basis. Their rates are included in your. So I'm not looking for any expense at this point, just the relationship, just the assurity that we have somebody to call in case we have a situation like we discovered and experienced on December 11th. This agreement has been reviewed by the general counsel. He had several revisions. Those revisions were actually approved by Wilson. Wilson came back with a revision of their own, and that revision has been approved by general counsel. So with that said, staff recommends approval of the Wilson contract for maintenance agreement for emergency service and maintenance work on a task order basis.
I scanned this, but I didn't notice any mention of transportation. Who's responsible for transportation in the case that they have to go and do some maintenance?
Wilson Construction would be responsible for getting their equipment to that.
But that's not specifically stated in here, is it?
I don't know if it's specifically stated. I know that would be their.
That's
their protocol.
They just assume that.
Yeah, they would not rely on the district to get.
Because there's expenses related to that, especially if we have a big winter.
Yeah, and when I went and met with them, Peter, I actually reviewed their site. They have snowcats,
Okay.
they have the necessary equipment. And that was one of our, pieces that, you and I had discussed, how about if we get equipment to transport mechanics or operators out there, and they'd actually rather do it all themselves. They're self-contained.
Okay, and where's
Yeah.
their equipment? stored?
Rancho Cordova?
At where?
Rancho
Rancho
Cordova
Cordova.
in Sacramento. They have a large yard down there, and I went and met with them, developing this agreement. So it's pretty impressive, and I welcome any of you if you want to come down and meet them.
Questions, comments? from
Yeah,
the board?
I had looked, I was reading this over, I didn't see the rates. I just see that the rates need to conform to certain labor standards and so on, but I didn't see the rates themselves.
I have
And
a
there's
rates,
the 8-hour day limitation and so on, but I didn't see.
yeah, I have a rate schedule I can forward to you if you'd,
I'm just curious.
yeah.
It would be nice to know, just, if something happens, and a crew of 3 people have to go out to fix something, and it takes an 8-hour day, what's the cost of that? I'm just sort of, would like to have some general sense of that.
Yeah, at the, if you'd like to defer, I can go get those rates and bring them back into the.
Oh, no, it's standard rates, I understand it, right?
They're about 3 pages long, they have a lot of different equipment.
Yeah, no, I don't, I just would like to know what it is, I don't need it.
The contract says that they're in attachment A. Do we just not have attachment A yet?
That's a mistake. I have attachment A, I have reviewed attachment A. They just didn't make it to the packet.
Okay.
I haven't read the agreement, I apologize, but is there a term?
We'll forgive you for it.
Is there a term? In other words, is
Yeah.
it in perpetuity? Or could they come back in 3 years and renegotiate, or?
It's until either side chooses to cancel.
Oh,
Right.
okay, thank you.
So it's a background contract.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments from the audience?
One final note to Eric's question. Any task order, I would definitely take before the board, unless it's an extreme emergency, I would at least take it before the president for approval before signing.
Sure, of course.
Just to reassure you as far as the cost.
Well, I'm in favor of it, so I guess I'll make the motion to approve this contract.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Moving on to 8D3, discussion and possible approval of scope of work for Resource Concepts, Inc. regarding environmental permit compliance monitoring of the Out Valley Power Line corridor. And this doesn't have a person attached to it, so I assume it's you, Michael.
Good assumption. So RCI has submitted a proposal to assist the district of ongoing environmental permit compliance monitoring. These are required monitoring. This is a T&M contract with a not-to-exceed amount of $20,400 for the first year. It is a plan for district staff to train with RCI during the first year in order to take over some of these tasks as time goes along. So I asked Michelle to actually give us a 1-year contract so that staff could train with her. This is required monitoring in the Forest Service corridor and in other corridors, and Michelle's here to elaborate.
Thank you. As a part of the special use permit that the district has with the Forest Service, there's certain monitoring that must occur over a 3-year cycle, and then additional monitoring that has to occur at a one-time, and then additional monitoring once that 3-year cycle is done every 3 years in perpetuity. The monitoring has to do with the condition of the access roads, let's take the roads that the district will be maintaining or maintaining for access, but we put a lot of power line in Forest Service roads. So the district has to annually monitor those roads to look for any erosion, any sort of settlement, and discuss with the Forest Service the remedies of that. Additionally, we have any areas that we disturbed outside of roadway corridors, we went through and we revegetated. We have to monitor those areas for successive revegetation for a 3-year cycle. Invasive weeds, we had certain areas where there were invasive weeds present. We documented those with the Forest Service as a part of the environmental documentation. we have to go back and do an annual inspection for invasive weeds to make sure that things haven't spread, and if they have spread, then provide the Forest Service with information regarding the GIS locations of those. Sensitive plants, we had 2 areas, I believe, where we had sensitive plants documented within the corridor that was disturbed. We have to go back 1 time annually to look at those areas and just report back to the Forest Service the condition of those areas and document any sensitive plants that may be reoccurring back in those areas. And all of this is predicated with an annual operations meetings that the district has to have with the Forest Service. So what this scope of work does, it includes all of those monitoring. Unfortunately, the timing of these, it would be great if we could go do 1 site visit and do, check all these things off, but we must look at the access roads early in the season after snow melt or after the first large rain event. We can't look at the weed growth and the revegetation till later on in the growing cycle. So this includes the necessary site visits to be able to do those inspections. It includes all of the reporting back to the Forest Service. It includes coordination with the district staff and with the Forest Service to relay those reports, discuss any sort of remediation, prepare a report if there is any remediation that needs to happen. We appreciate the district willing to bring folks along to help and to help get trained. For some of the vegetative monitoring that has to happen, it has to be a qualified biologist, and so we do have that individual on staff. So we'll continue to work with the district regarding making sure that that requirement is met. This proposal also includes the maintenance or the inspection of the district required roads. So we've wrapped that up. We would assume that that would be done at the same time that the other maintenance of the other inspection of the roads would occur, so we could get some efficiencies with that.
So your contract is for 1 year, but how, we have to do this in perpetuity or for 3 years?
There's a 3-year, 3-year inspections for once a year for 3 years for the roads, the invasive weeds, and the revegetation. Once that 3-year cycle is done, there's every 3-year monitoring for, I believe it's just the invasive weeds. And that would be in perpetuity. You would go out and you would document the location of invasive weeds. It's not as onerous of a task as it may seem, because these weeds tend to be in fairly distinct populations, and they've all been mapped. And so we have it all in a GIS database. And so we'll go out and we'll remap that in GIS. We'll update that with the Forest Service. The district has a unit that we helped recommend purchase of. They will be able to go out in the future with the proper weed identification and do the mapping and the relaying of that data to the Forest Service. So it's not...
It's mainly that section of Bear River Road where it goes under the highway, is that correct?
There's some other little spot sections. That's the biggest one of the yellow
That's
star
this
thistle
one.
there. Right, but there are some other distinct areas.
Which actually Caltrans put there. Is that right?
I don't know how it got there. I know
Uh-huh.
that it has grown over the years, but that is being actually very aggressively dealt with by both Amador County and by the Forest Service to deal with that particular location.
Okay.
Thank you. Any questions, comments from the board? Lynn?
I'm just curious, regarding the invasive species, it sounds like invasive weeds, that you report them to the Forest Service. Is it the understanding that then the Forest Service eradicates them in those locations?
They have been aggressively trying to eradicate them, especially the yellow star thistle, which is
Right,
the
that's a
really
big one.
nasty one. Some of these others are not, it's a distinct population where there'll be one plant. And so they'll go out and, depending on which noxious weed it is how they sometimes they just pull it.
Right, I was
And
gonna
that
say, they
deals
step
with
on
it.
it.
Right.
Right. Thank you.
To further address Peter's point, the first 3 years is extensive monitoring.
Right.
After that, we'll always have monitoring, inspection, and operations maintenance responsibilities according to our long-term permit with the Forest Service. and with Caltrans. So we'll always be out there, but in these first 3 years, I think it's important to have RCI as a backup to, to be able to make these inspections. And I appreciate Michelle's flexibility in making it a 1-year contract and also doing it on a T&M basis so that, we actually direct the expenditure rather than just being a set amount. So staff has reviewed this proposal and recommends board approval.
I'd like to move that we approve this proposal with RCI for a 1-year contract for the necessary monitoring.
I'll second that.
I'll say that, but I have one discussion
Sure.
question. Where does this show up in our cost expenses? Is this sort of subtracted from our budget for annual maintenance?
It would be an operation maintenance issue.
Okay. Do we have a sense of whether the budgeted amount, which is just a percentage of construction costs, is still within range?
I will come back to the board and let you know exactly where we stand there.
Okay.
We're being able to, so far, it's been less expensive than the percentage that we use.
Okay. It'd be nice to just see what known costs we already have in there, and then what's the contingency.
Yeah, I anticipate a fairly rigorous budgeting cycle this year, based on a lot of known costs now and changed costs.
But I welcome this particular contract into that expense category. It's very useful.
Before we move on, I guess
So we need to vote, sorry.
I'm sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
So it passes unanimously, thank you. I just have a question while Michelle is here, and it's directed at you, Michael, but also you, Brandy, and that is 2.5 months into operation of this line, at least based on the lack of problems you've raised with me, Michael. We had the PG&E powerhouse fire in November, we had the tree on the 11th, but it's my sense that the thing is working pretty well. Is that true, Randy, or are we just not hearing about it?
No, absolutely. From our standpoint, everything is working very well.
Okay, well, congratulations, thank you.
Thank you guys. It's all because of you guys.
So moving on to 8D4, which is update on the district's efforts to enable load-dependent start-stop generator load testing at the powerhouse.
At the January meeting, the board approved a proposal from Exponential Engineering to ensure that if the out valley line goes down, the powerhouse will turn on automatically and the district will have the ability to test the generators under load without having a power outage. So that's 2 things. That's one, automatically having the generators go on if the lights go out. And secondly, to be able to test the generators under load so we can blow out the DPFs and not clog up the emission systems. And Dave Rightley's here today on the phone to give us an update. Dave?
Good morning, everybody. Yes, we've been busily working on this project for the district. Our senior engineer, Ben Hoffner, is primarily responsible for the work. We had intended to be at the powerhouse working with district staff to perfect these changes to the generator controls the week of January 26th. We reported to Michael this week that had slipped for 1 week, but not because of any major concerns with the technology we're dealing with. We have substantially written some new programming for the programmable logic controller that's in the generator, in the controls. We've also written substantially changes to the Woodward generator control units that are in the powerhouse. We've got a few technical support questions for both manufacturers, that is Woodward of the governor of generator controls and GE for the programmable logic controller. And what we anticipate is going to happen, and now we're talking to Michael about the week of February 2nd, his bench will be there. He will be working with district staff. There will be a minimal amount of wires that need to be installed in the generator cabinets. These are those cabinets against the east wall in the switchgear room. We'll be working directly with district staff in effecting doing that wiring. We'll also be then inserting the new programming into both the generator controllers and into the programmable logic controller, and we'll be coordinating with staff to essentially is going to be that in the event of a loss of Out Valley, and in coordination with what we know about Out Valley, for example, the possible reclosing of Out Valley due to a problem way back on the PG&E system, the generators will automatically start, will automatically then pick up the load and serve the customers, serve the district's customers without intervention from your staff. And then a second part of this effort is that, and we will be doing this testing at the same time the week of February 2nd, is the changes so that the district staff can bring generators online, briefly parallel with Out Valley, and then isolate Out Valley and allow the district staff to exercise generators by serving the load, and then to be able to reverse that process, and that is to, with district staff initiation, the generators will resync with Out Valley and then disconnect, allowing Out Valley to serve the customers, and both those transitions will not involve an outage to the customer. I think that's a pretty good summary of what we're doing, and I think we're very confident that the week of February 2nd we're going to be doing that. And again, we're just coordinating with Michael and district staff about how the testing is going to go.
So, Dave, this
Questions
is...
or comments?
Yeah, hi, Dave, this is Eric. I do have a question on the testing process and the loading of the software and so on. Are there risks associated with that would bring power down in the valley-wide? And the worst of that, of course, would be there'd be no power because you're kind of in the middle of testing the transfer from Out Valley to generator and back.
Eric, I think I heard most of what you just said there. The testing that will be occurring February 2nd, we've informed district staff, we will need to schedule some outages for the district's customers in order to truly test this simulation of loss of Out Valley. That's one way to make it happen, but also during this testing of bringing generators on and offline for generator exercising, we will need to be able to have some brief outages.
Dave, this is Bob. I have some other questions. At the last board meeting, you said you were going to be doing some of this testing the following week. Did that happen in December?
No, it did not.
Okay.
We
It was a yes or no question. So, secondly, the decision is to wait 3 minutes for 3 minutes of loss of signal before starting up. Why 3 minutes and not 30 seconds? Or some other number?
The 3 minutes is related to the PG&E control and protection design back on the Salt Springs to Tiger Creek to KM Green line. In the event of a transient fault, a fault such as a lightning strike or wires slapping together in the wind, their system will automatically it will interrupt power to the Out Valley system, but it will automatically bring the power back on, and the maximum delay that would occur for that is 3 minutes. So what we're doing with the 3 minutes is giving it, because the system doesn't know for sure whether or not the outage is PG&E or whether it's a tree in our line or something else, the system is going to give PG&E that 3 minutes to see if they come back on. Because if they do come back on, we'll instantly reclose, and the customers would be back on. We may adjust this 3 minute timer, maybe 2.5 minutes, but it's going to be approximate. It's going to be in that vicinity.
Well, but if we made it shorter, what would go wrong if they brought power back on, sooner?
What we could do, and we'll discuss this with the staff, would be to start the generators, and again, waiting to not allow them to serve load until the timer goes on. And the benefit there would be our generators would be spinning. We'd be able to restore power to the customers using the generators a little bit quicker, a few minutes quicker.
I think I asked a different question. Why not wait a shorter time period, power on, and if PG&E comes back within the 3 minutes, we transfer back? What would we lose by that?
We would definitely have the power outage until the generators would automatically come back on, and then staff would have to switch back over to Out Valley. But this could be pretty instantaneous as far as
Right.
a lightning strike or and it could happen quite a bit. But we certainly can look at that as a,
I just think as a strategy, sitting 3 minutes on the chairlift when it doesn't have to happen is an inconvenience, and I don't see any benefit to doing that, except there could be some restarts that we avoided, but I would rather have a few extra than have a longer outage. I mean, we're used to being out for a couple of days at a time, so maybe I'm getting greedy, but
Well, I
I
guess
just
so.
don't know why we would pick such a long time.
I guess the thing I ask, is I'm assuming that every time you do this transfer and the generators come on, it's putting some stress on the generators. And I don't know how often these little transient things happen. I mean, what if they happen very often, then the engines are coming on very often, only to then shut down?
Well, our experience so far is it hasn't happened at all.
That's true. Well, is it? I mean,
Well, no, but those were outages of longer than, it didn't go out as a transient and then come back on within the 2.5 minutes. It went out and stayed out. So I would just request that we look at, I don't find the 3 minutes as a good number, and I'd either like to figure out why it's a good number, or I'd like to make it shorter. That
I
would be
don't
my
see any
request.
reason why we couldn't look into that and get
Okay.
back to the board at the next board meeting.
All right, and then my other question, Dave, is there a simulator for testing this software?
Woodward has some. We're very familiar with these Woodward generator controllers, so the most cost-effective way to deal with this is to basically do our testing as we've with the units with our new programming built into it. It's pretty straightforward. It's a series of logical steps. If this breaker opens, then you send a signal to start this generator. So the testing will go pretty quickly and smoothly, I believe, and I'd rather just be doing it right there with the units in case we have any issues with any one of the generator controls. We'll know right away.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, as a software engineer, I was a little disappointed in the answer. But in answer to Eric's question, yes, things can go wrong.
yeah, no, well, I'm assuming something will go wrong. I
Yeah.
mean, just, but I was just wondering what the worst downside is. I assume that at worst, things will be brought back on manually, and I'm assuming. I just don't want any long outage.
I guess the only other thing I would say is that we do this programming and then have a couple people review it. So instead of having a simulator where we're testing it, we're basically just putting our eyes on the code and walking ourselves through the ladder logic with the original engineer as well as a review engineer.
I understand exactly what
I
you're
know
doing.
it's simplistic.
Yeah, okay. Those are my questions.
Any power outage that we would have during this time period would be not during lift operations.
Sure, right.
So we would have that in the evening hours probably.
How long does it take before you when you start the generator until you can deliver power?
Cats are almost instantaneous. They're not like the Volvos that require. Brandy, why don't you give a header answer?
The cats can be put online within a minute or so of turning them on. And then once online, we can immediately start closing breakers. So I would say within 2 to 3 minutes of startup, those cats can be under load and the resort can be coming back up.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about, Bob, is instead of 6 to 7 minutes, we're talking about 3 minutes.
Right.
If we're able to, eliminate that 3-minute pause.
Well, I agree with Bob's suggestion, unless staff or Dave Rightly come back with some reason why we should delay. I'd rather start them up immediately and serve the load as quickly as possible and risk some false, I guess it's called false negatives, right? Because it's not a real fault.
Understood.
Good.
Any other questions or comments on load-dependent stop and starting from either the board or the audience? Update on district's efforts, we already did that. So 8E is discussion and possible action regarding the district's efforts to comply with PG&E's transmission interconnection handbook related to the interconnection agreement. This has 3 portions, and I think they're all manager sharp.
As the board is aware, the district is working with PG&E to comply with the with their transmission interconnection handbook according to the terms of our interconnection agreement. And that's a picture that you're seeing of the Salt Springs Flat, as I'll call it. And that shows pole number 1 in the right background, pole number 2 in the foreground, and then pole number 3 off to the left. The district plans to install a switch station between poles 2 and 3 in the Salt Springs area to move our fault interrupting equipment close to the point of interconnection at pole number 1. And this picture shows number 2 and down to number 3, and our switch station would sit somewhere right in the middle, probably right in the middle of it, to get the spans, etc. This shows the existing 3-terminal protection scheme that you've seen before, which shows it going all the way up to KM Green. The intent is to modify that 3-way so it's just a short span of the protection. This shows a revised protection scheme with the addition of the switch station. The district has until December 2018 to complete this project, but is motivated and enthusiastic to complete it sooner for cost savings. One of the first items needed is for PG&E to complete a system impact study, which is generally a feasibility study of the project. The district has met with PG&E and prepared a directives for PG&E system impact study. This is basically our input on what they should study. Rather than having a shotgun approach, we're trying to do a 22 approach for them to use to develop this plan. Once complete, if the report is favorable, a facility study, which is estimated to be about $125,000, would be initiated, and this study gives the more specific information about the exact equipment to be used, the exact cost of that equipment, and the probable costs. At the same time, after the system impact study is done, exponential and the environmental work can begin and the design phases of the project can begin. The fee estimate for the system impact study before you is $70,000 plus a 15% contingency for a total of $80,500. This study could be completed, if not sooner, but is scheduled to be completed by May 26th of 2015. And so this would be a portion of the PG&E cost. This is still a potential budget. We plan to, now that we're starting to see costs come in, we're hoping to formalize a budget, get it to the board for approval. As far as, I think we've narrowed down the scope, and I think PG&E has agreed to that scope, and I think we can narrow down a budget to a much more definite number. But this is part of the project management. And this forecasts a $2.6 million expenditure, but it all depends on the final configuration. District staff has reviewed the system impact study, as has our consultant, and I recommend approval of the plan.
You said $6 million? I'm sorry.
2.6.
Oh, 2.6.
So I have a question about the system impact study. It suggests that we have to put in a new communications line. Is that strung on the poles the whole way? Can I just ask why that would be necessary, since there's already a communication route through PG&E and we could just add another couple hundred feet?
Davey, you want to address that?
Yes, sir. The need for this communication line, for the district's communication line, is to allow the district to continue to have remote monitoring, status, and control of the new switch station down at Salt Springs. So in other words, the district owns the fiber system that goes to Green. We need to carry the information from the relays back all the way to the powerhouse. So that part of the telecommunications component of the project is to allow the district to monitor and control their new switch station.
But my question is, if we wanted a less expensive way to do it, we're talking about almost no bandwidth requirement on this data. There's already a fiber that PG&E has that's very close to where we need to be. So why don't we can we rent a little capacity from them put in a really, instead of running a line across these poles, which can't be cheap, and I bet there's an outage involved that we have to pay PG&E for and everything else, why can't we just come up with a less expensive telecommunications route? And why can't this study look at that as opposed to this requiring a new line?
I would anticipate that getting, asking PG&E to carry district telecommunications traffic across their system and back. I think, Bob, what you're talking about is maybe this lease circuit that we have, where we have a connection to PG&E between the powerhouse and their Stockton facility, which is this lease circuit. I hesitate to think that that's going to be less expensive. Now, I do want to mention, Bob, that this installation of a fiber optic cable on the 115 kV pole between Green and the new switch station, I have not given Michael a number on that, but Exponential has a lot of experience with doing this kind of thing, and what we're thinking about and what we have experience in is an all-dielectric self-supporting cable. These are very small, very lightweight cables that can be attached below the additional wires, the existing wires, without impacting the height of the pole, the changes of the foundations, or anything. I anticipate that the cost of this fiber optic cable is going to be merely the material, the attachment hardware that's needed on the poles, and the labor. I do not anticipate any changes at all to the 115 kV structure to bring this cable down.
Right, but is that $100,000 or? My only suggestion is, rather than requiring that specific solution, can the study just say, you know, the CASI has to be in there, and there may be a cheap. I'm just reminded of we could have dug a ditch instead of putting an overhead line. So I'm just asking the question, why can't we do it a different way?
We'll
If it's less
include that
expensive.
in our, we'll include that in the system impact study.
I have two questions on this. One is, who wrote this two-pager? Is that, did Dave write it, or we write it? Is this what we want? This?
So we wrote the directive, and then PG&E comes out with the system impact study.
Right, so this two-pager here on pages
43 and 44.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, that was the one that, and that was a collaboration between consultants and staff.
Okay, so that's what we want.
Right.
And secondly, how does this solve the problem? Meaning, what I understand simplistically is that we're moving the switch gear from that's currently in KM Green to a new station in the Salt Springs area, and that the whole thrust here is we have to control our destiny, and they have to control their destiny. How does this improve our ability to control our destiny?
It's not an issue of control, it's an issue of location. If you remember, the transmission interconnection agreement states that each party will own their own protection.
Right.
And that protection will be within 100 or one span of the point of demarcation. The point of demarcation being at pole 1, our breaker is actually at KM Green, which is about 1 mile and an eighth away. They want to move that breaker down close to the point of demarcation, hence the need for the switch station.
So we're still dependent on each other with the three-way protection.
Right.
It's just we're moving the breaker.
And that
down.
protection, now that we own that protection very close to the point of demarcation, and our three-way protection scheme is only 100 or 200 feet. We own everything up the hill. They'll no longer need PG&E have access to KM Green, nor the T1 line that goes to KM Green, and all the other things about KM Green. That all goes away, and now our protection is at Salt Springs, and it's all about location.
So my big statement here is we can't afford $2.675 million. We have $3.2 million. We're going to blow through about 900,000 of that. That leaves $2.3 million in that reserve, which is where I thought this was going to be paid out of.
Well,
We don't have $2.6 million.
no, over the time period of this contract, we accumulate cash from the rates.
To reduce rates.
No, we accumulate cash from the depreciation.
To reduce rates.
No. The depreciation is a non-cash item, so it's built into the rates, the property depreciation, that generates cash, and the
Well,
current cash
okay.
strategy was to have the first 2 million go into this project.
I did not understand that. I thought this was coming out of our reserves and we were building up cash to pay down debt to reduce rates.
After the 2 million, yeah.
Oh, I'll just say I'm not happy with that answer.
I think the
Let's cut-
strategy is
cut
to
all
reduce
this.
rates by lower depreciation, but there's still gonna be some depreciation.
We cannot afford $2.675 million.
Not today, at least.
We cannot afford that. We cannot afford that. We can't afford $2 million, but that's the number that's been floating around. We cannot afford $2.675 million. And I think that the charge to Michael and Michelle and the staff and to ourselves is to keep this damn price below $2 million.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Without question. I mean, this increment between 1.3 and 2.6, we're all of a sudden PG&E giving ourselves 50% on each side. So we can't afford it.
Well, I think the charge to staff has to factor that in and come back with as cost-effective a goal as possible.
Well, especially if we try to build it right away. I mean, we might be able to afford it in 5 years.
We just don't have the cash.
Yeah, I agree. It's an alarm.
Just to offer a counter view on that, just a little bit. The plan for the drawdowns for the loan and the rates and everything else was designed to create $2 million in cash to cover this project over the first 3 years. So the cash plan for that is built into the debt service. I don't want to see it go over $2 million. I was hoping the $2 million was generous. So I think there's a question of making it cost effective, but the cash to cover $2 million over 3 years is designed into the cash flow plan without impacting reserves.
I would like to see it built as quickly as possible, Peter, which may be different from you.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying,
the reason
my
is-
understanding isn't quite what Bob was saying, and I still don't quite understand how the debt service drawdown is going to cover I'm not arguing with you, I just don't
Okay.
understand it, Bob.
We had a long argument at the Finance Committee meeting, constructive discussion, about whether we should have any short-term maturities to the RUS debt laddering. And we agreed, I think it was for a period of 5 years, is that right? That none of the maturities would come due in less than 5 years. Now, there is some principal that's required to be paid over that period of time. So it's not black and white. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's right. I think there's some in 3 years.
Yeah,
but-
it's a 3-year.
Okay.
That's what I remember. So you can't reduce rates unless you pay down the debt.
Well, that's what I meant.
Yeah,
What I
okay,
was
so
referring to.
we currently don't have any debt due in the first 3 years, and the reason for that is we figured we needed to accumulate cash either for unexpected things in early operation, and we knew that we might have $2 million here. So that's the reason why we didn't have any debt come due in the first 3 years. And it was a very vigorous debate, but we felt even if this came in cheaper, which we'd all like to see, there's too many unknowns to start paying down debt in the first couple of years.
Well, just, my concern is that Vail's not making snow. We're not consuming electricity. We're not bringing enough electrons over that out valley line yet.
Right.
We've got all this debt. We've got a cash projection that takes us in our general fund to under $1 million within 12 months versus the $2 million that we had hoped to be at minimum. So I just am saying, in my view, we can't afford that, bundling all these things together. Now, if we had a tremendous snow year and crowds were up here and we're actually producing and selling 7.5 million kilowatt hours, I'd be thinking differently, but we're not. So that's.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments from the board or the audience?
Just for clarification, this is a required project or it's discretionary?
It's not discretionary.
It's required or the rates go up.
Okay.
Yeah. And
If we don't deliver on this, a bunch of savings get reversed out, and the rates go up 8 or 10 cents.
And isn't there a timeline in which we have to accomplish this?
Yes, by 2018.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yes, we can either do this or pay more.
Right.
And,
So-
but managing our cash in this process is, as Eric points out, is critical in the absence of snow particularly.
Okay, anything else on, this is the preliminary budget section, right?
This is actually, we still need to move and approve or take action on the system impact study.
Right.
Yeah, well,
That's the first step.
that's the first step, yeah. We need to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that being focused like this was the right thing, and so I'd like to approve. What motion do you need?
Motion, staff has reviewed the system impact study and looking for a motion to approve the system impact for the president of the board to sign the system impact study as presented or in a form similar to what is presented, and the expenditure of up to $80,500.
Okay.
Well, I'd
And
like-
my requested change is to look at alternatives on the telecommunications if they're cheaper.
So I'd like to so move with the modification that Bob has suggested.
I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes. And by the way, just, it's staff's recommendation that we approve that, right?
Yeah, staff and the consultants worked hard to get this on the timeline. We are on schedule with board approval of this, and PG&E is matching our enthusiasm to get this done quickly. I think it's imperative that if our directive is to stay under $2 million or a number even less than that, we need to do this quickly because every minute that we go longer, then PG&E just tacks on, the costs just keep on going up and up and up.
Okay.
So I appreciate the board's action.
Have we covered 8E2, cost to date preliminary budget? That's
Yes, we have.
passed. So 8E3 is discussion and possible approval of scope of work for resource concepts regarding project management, PG&E coordination, and initial environmental scoping service for the study phase 2015 work of the switch station project.
The district has requested that RCI produce a scope of work for the first year of the switch station project. Due to the unknown nature of this project, this is again a T&M project, or T&M with a not-to-exceed figure of $59,500. I appreciate RCI's willingness to do a T&M so that we can control our expenditures and as we go along. And Michelle is here to go into details.
Thank you very much. What we learned as we moved through the Out Valley project was anytime we're dealing with PG&E, it's a moving target. And so to be able to respond to what the district needs, I approached Michael as we were drafting this to say what's going to be what I think is the most cost-effective way to deal with this, and that would be on a T&M basis. So I looked at what I anticipate, the maximum amount of work that I anticipate to occur over the year, knowing the project as it stands at this point, which would be a dedication of 8 hours of my time per year, plus minimal overhead in case we needed admin staff to back me up. The work that I would do would be directed by the district, by Michael, calling me, asking me to participate in meetings, asking me to review documents, such as we did with the system impact study and the meetings that we've had with PG&E. We do have weekly meetings with PG&E. Right now they've been fairly short. My time commitment so far has averaged, some weeks has been 2 hours, some weeks has been 8 hours. So right now, and we had a pretty heavy time with getting the system impact study ready to be brought before the board. Included with this also is the preliminary initial environmental documentation scoping. As we move forward with the project, we have to do an environmental document. We have had initial conversations with the Forest Service about what that document will entail. What we are anticipating is a significantly scaled down environmental document. However, until the system impact study is drafted by PG&E, we can't approach the Forest Service with a project description to be able to know what that document's going to be. Right now, we see the minimum document could be as simple as a letter to the file, which would be the best case scenario, as long as we can meet any of the FERC and CPUC licensing requirements for environmental documentation that has to go along with those permits. What we see right now as the worst case scenario would be an environmental assessment document, which again would be a fairly straightforward, fairly simple document to complete, because where the location of where the switch station would be constructed, we've done a significant amount of analyses with the Out Valley project. In that area already, we would have to go back and update some of the studies, but we've already done the noxious weeds, we've already done sensitive plants, we've already done cultural, we've already done T&E species. So a significant portion of the work has already been done as part of the initial document that we did. So we're looking at right now, we're anticipating concurrence with the Forest Service for a very, very scaled down environmental document. So included in this scope of work is the ability for us to have those coordinating meetings with the Forest Service, prepare the project description that we would need to draft to submit to the Forest Service, and include that coordination with PG&E regarding the environmental documentation that has to go along with the CPUC and the FERC filing.
I like a letter to the file.
I would prefer a letter to the file as well.
Michelle, one question. Does this also include what the actual construction season could be, and is there still a risk that it's abbreviated because of various critters?
Correct. At this point, we all know that there is a peregrine falcon, I believe, down in that area. He and she have been nesting on the dam face. My understanding is that that nesting pair sometime is on the dam, sometime is on the granite dome behind there. If they nest on the dome, this project area is outside of the quarter-mile buffer. If they nest on the dam face, it's within the quarter-mile buffer. So prior to the start of construction, we would have to do the nesting bird surveys. And again, similar to what we did with the spotted owl, if we are right on the periphery of that quarter-mile buffer, we will be approaching the Forest Service asking for consideration to be allowed to construct in the time frame that we need to construct.
Okay, but let's just suppose that they decide to nest as close as possible. What would that mean for our construction, and how would we deal with that?
The construction season would be closed from March 1st through July 31st. So we would not be able to do ground disturbing activities until after July 31st of any given year.
And do we have any sense of how many months of construction we need, or?
More than 3.
Well, yeah,
We're fortunate in the location of this is an area where we have a longer construction season. In that this site has access all year round. PG&E accesses this, so the road is kept open all year round. And so if we got down to the tail end of the season, I would foresee us having the ability to construct further into the fall than we have, say, up at KM Green. I don't have a feel for what the construction season would be. This is not, what we anticipate is not it's not nearly as big as what we constructed at KM Green. And so we're talking maybe a 12 to 16 week construction period. Again, I throw that number out, but I have not looked into that.
Good enough, thanks.
Any other questions, comments? Anything else you want to cover on this one?
No, staff has reviewed this scope and recommends approval by the board.
Yeah, so I'd just like to say I really appreciate trying to limit the environmental, because that was something I was going to be asking about, but you tackled it first, so I appreciate that.
Spanish, can I make one more comment
Sure,
on that?
sure. Make two.
The original time schedule that we developed as a part of the revised interconnection agreement had a fairly protracted time period to it. We've had internal discussions, and right now what we're doing is we're revising that schedule to run the environmental documentation concurrently with the facility study. The way the original schedule was is we had to complete the system impact study, complete the facility study, and then complete the environmental documentation. But based on our preliminary conversations with PG&E, we believe that we can confidently run the environmental documentation at the same time the facility study is going on. And so anytime we can compress that schedule, we see cost savings associated with that. And so we are very actively pursuing that.
I've actually asked Michelle to put together, we have a 4-year schedule. We know what that looks like. We've asked Michelle to put together a 2-year schedule. So that'll be coming back before the board. This isn't for the interconnection agreement. This is for our goal setting.
And so these studies that we're paying PG&E for, if it's as simple as moving the KM Green switchgear down to a new location, do we anticipate significant impacts on their system, or is this just sort of a required tax, if you will? Meaning paying PG&E these amounts of money for them to do what they're going to do?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, actually. The entire switch station construction, the absolute entire, is done between poles 2 and 3, which the district owns.
Right.
So all of that construction would be done by the district. PG&E's construction activities would be at their relay stations, shortening those relays that we've all talked about. Instead of going up all the way to K Green, they'd have to only end, and they'd have to do their RTU testing and all that once again. But that's all of the construction that PG&E is doing on this. Mostly what these studies are doing is seeing if there's any impacts to their system by allowing us to shorten that line up. So I would say that it's more of the latter on your question.
A tax, just a required tax.
Yes.
Well, I guess I would appreciate if you try to minimize that required tax, particularly on the second one, the facility study.
But I mean, our meeting at with PG&E on the system impact study and telling them what we wanted to study was really imperative, because if not, then they'll study a lot more than what we want them. And them focusing on what we'd like to build is huge to reduce the amounts of these taxes.
And is shortening relays a construction activity, or is that just a programming activity?
Well, it's a program, but it's in the construction phase, I guess you would call it.
Okay. So it's reprogramming the relays, it's not hard construction.
Right.
And when we met with PG&E and we discussed this, we had the right people in the room, the people that we're going to be dealing with throughout the design of this project, who said, yes, this is the way that we need to go, and here are the items that we need to make sure that are looked at by PG&E in the system impact study. And so we did have a very focused and a very productive meeting, so we feel that we have started out in a very focused approach with this one.
So shall we move on?
I need a
Actually, I'm
motion.
sorry.
Yeah.
I'll motion for approval of the RCI contract.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Thank you.
So thank you for coming up today.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Good
Thank
to see
you.
you.
Look forward to seeing you all.
So moving on to 8F, this is an updated discussion, possible action regarding resolving harmonics and other electric distribution power quality issues. Manager Sharp and Dave Wrigley. And Brandy.
Power quality issues have been a long-term concern in Kirkwood, with the district receiving in a number of inquiries about the quality of our power of the electric service. In 2013, the board hired Exponential Engineering to perform a power quality study. This study, completed in April of 2014, used district-owned power quality meters at various locations to analyze the frequency, the voltage, and the harmonic distortion of these 3 feeders. The final report stated that the power quality in Kirkwood was not as bad as feared, and that frequency and voltage were actually within the ranges of acceptable ranges. However, the report did show that the total harmonic distortion, THD, produced by some of the chairlift exceeded the district's electric rules and regulation, which is IEEE 519, standard of 5%. The report recommends that filters be installed on these chairs, and that this power quality meter study be expanded to the balance of the chairs to see exactly what the problem is. On January 7, 2015, the district staff installed power quality meters on chairs 1, 5, and 11. Previously, we have data on chairs 7, 10, and 4. And they will be moved to chairs 2, 3, and 9 after 2 weeks of data collection. Once all of this data is collected, we'll ask Exponential to evaluate this data and come back to the board with a recommendation. We could also be potentially be putting these on the other outlets that could be contributing to the issue, such as the wastewater treatment plant, the vehicle maintenance shop, elevators, anything that might have a variable frequency drive. As stated, Exponential recommends installing harmonic filters, and on page 54 in your packet are some estimated costs of those filters. These filters would go beyond the meter and would be the customer's responsibility. Any questions on that before I move on?
Did you cover chair 6? I was trying to keep track of the numbers.
Chair 6 actually has a filter on
But
it.
have we done a quality meter?
No,
Chair
only
6?
on the 3 that I mentioned.
Is there a reason why we wouldn't do chair 6 as well?
We just need to figure out how, because it already has a filter, so we need to evaluate the operation of that.
Okay, so we would make sure that the filter's operating correctly. Okay.
Okay. Questions so far? From the audience? Keep going, Michael.
So as President O'Grady mentioned, the power has been on for 2.5 months, and it seems to be operating quite well. In fact, as a long-term resident, it seems to be extremely stable. We're not seeing any power is just there. The generators aren't continuously having to adjust to meet the load. So improvements to system frequency and harmonic distortion have been seen due to the App Valley project, and Brandy's here today to evidence that improvement. Brandy?
Hi. So in this presentation, the first slide I'd like to show is a frequency graph from last season when we were running on generators. And this is a 2-day period when just the front side was operating. And you can see here on the left-hand side and then further towards the right, these 2 sections of increased frequency disturbance. If we go on to the next slide, this is a 2-day period, front side lift operation, this season on the Out Valley. So we see a significantly smoother graph without the spikes during lift operation.
And the scales are the same?
The scales are the same.
Sorry.
The scales are the same, and this meter is a fluke meter owned by the district that's actually installed in this building, so it's on the residential circuit. If we go on to the next slide, we look at harmonics. And on the left-hand side, we see total harmonic distortion. This is, again, that first period last season, and our total harmonic distortion was about 2.8. The smaller bar graphs to the right are individual harmonics. And then for comparison, our last slide here is the harmonics from this season, which drop our total harmonic distortion for a comparable period to about 1.5. So we have seen some noticeable stabilization in our frequency and harmonics.
So the question that I raised in the committee meeting is I understand that the harmonics out of range can be damaging to various kinds of equipment, appliances, and so on. My question is if we're experiencing, even if chairs are not behaving properly in the sense of harmonics, if that is in a sense being absorbed by the larger system, at what point do we say it's okay and we don't want to require Vail to make those expenditures? Or should those expenditures be made in any case, because even this could be damaging to others on the system.
Can we ask Dave a question? Dave, can harmonic distortion cause an increase in the actual amount of current that you're drawing?
Yes, it can cause heating in motors that are designed to operate at 60 hertz. When you have significant distortion, instead you're looking at something that's like 180 hertz. And that heating is an increase in current.
Right. I mean, so one answer is we're actually consuming more electricity than we would otherwise. So that's one cost, and the other is the quality. So I assume IEEE picks a number for a reason, and they're out of spec.
Great. Do you want to continue, or is that it for this agenda?
Oh, I want to continue.
Okay. Any other questions at this point, or should we have Michael continue? Please continue.
So we had a good operations and capital meeting, and some of the action items from that was to revisit the impacts on the system due to harmonics. We'll be bringing that back before the board, and especially, this heating and this increased current. Investigate what the industry is doing. How does Liberty Energy, et cetera, handle their harmonics? I know they have the same IEEE 519 standard. How do they mitigate these issues? Staff recommends that the district continue to gather power quality data. We should have all of the chairs monitored by the next board meeting and show this as a total package at the next meeting.
All the chairs, how about the other potential sources of harmonics? Innovators?
Potentially, but at least all the chairs.
Okay.
And we will research Chair 6 as far as how we can measure it as well.
So at this point, this is an update, you're just recommending that you continue to study it, and you'll have more data at the next meeting.
Yes, and we wanted to show the positive impacts of the App Valley project, which we're thrilled at, actually. We all had a feeling that that felt better, but to see it in actual data is great.
Yeah. Customer complaints about slow clocks?
Not that I've heard of, no.
Yeah, mine are
I
accurate.
assume it'd be more accurate. I checked it this morning, and it hasn't.
Well, you don't have time for the meeting.
Yeah, I got here on time to
Yeah, so, must be good.
Excellent.
Thanks, Randy.
Thank you, Brandy. So 8G is update and possible action regarding construction and approval process for the Timber Creek Townhomes project. Finally, something other than electricity.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So there'll be no action regarding the construction approval process. It's just an update for the board. And I'll divide my update into 3 categories. Inspections and construction inspections and district activities, and final district assessments. For construction and current construction activities, obviously the buildings have arrived, and the contractor is making good progress on making the connections within the building, mitigating all the seams, and basically remodeling the inside. If you haven't had a chance to walk over there and look at it, it's quite impressive. It's a building in a box. I mean, the only thing that they have to do is, again, meet all the seams and then run the existing sprinkler system, which was already built into the system, into the garage area and introduce new sprinkler heads in that garage area. So again, the contractor's working hard to match everything up. They are almost complete with the outside infrastructure work. There's a few more items that we identified that they'll have to mitigate. For example, the fire hydrant snorkel, the 2.5 orifice is actually facing the wrong way, and they'll have to have the contractor who did the work come back in and relocate that to district satisfaction. This week, the developer was able to run the conduit, or clear the conduit between our transformer, and I think it might be on the next slide, or slide 33. I'll point this out real quick. Thanks, Michael. The district's vault is over here at Seminoles West, here in the foreground of the picture. And on the December 22nd, the contractor attempted to run wire from that vault to the project, which required an outage for the Seminoles West area. They were unable to complete the activity due to lack of being prepared and having the right equipment on site. Just this week, they did come back and had septic clear that line. They had some water in the line. There was a blockage in the line, so they cleared it on one day. And then the next day, JDI Electric was able to actually pull wire and build the elevators, which has since been stood off and grounded at this time. So they'll be completing the remaining electrical side of the project for the next few days, and then at some point, they'll be asking the district to come back and actually do the final connections with propane, water, sewer, and so forth. So that's for the construction side of things. For inspections and district activities, again, as I mentioned before, we'll need to come back and do the final connections, install all the meters, verify that there's a backflow protection device for the water side of things, do a final fire inspection, as well as a pressure test for the fire system. And then I'm sure there'll be a few other things that'll pop up during this process. And then finally, for my report, for the acceptance and approval side of it, we've been in contact with Nate Whaley to help to negotiate or figure out the developer maintenance agreement. As you remember, the board approved a modification of the agreement to reduce the cost for the maintenance agreement. We have since been contacted by Nate to possibly put it back. So again, we'll finalize that developer agreement. The district will need to accept the record drawings or the as-built drawings, and then the district staff will make a recommendation to the planning committee and for the board to finally approve the project. Once the board approves the project, then we will send a letter to Amador County to reflect that we approve and will accept the project. So unless there's any other questions, that's my update on the Timber Creek Townhomes.
Thank you. When do you expect to ask us to approve the project?
It's up to the developer. It really is. There's quite a few hurdles that they need to get over, but I would imagine they would want us to do this as quickly as possible. So tentatively February,
Maybe March.
most likely March.
One further update on the project, the developer has chosen for the lesser amount in the maintenance guarantee and has delivered those funds.
Any questions from the board or audience on the Timber Creek Townhomes? Thank you, Rick. Moving on to 8H, which is presentation of possible approval of federal assistance grant for upgrading of the fire department's SCBA systems, which stands for self-contained breathing apparatus. That's you, Rick.
Yes, sir. And again, at this time, we're not asking for any board approval. This will be just an information report for the board. So the current self-contained breathing apparatuses, or BAs, that the fire department is using are almost 10 years old, and we received these devices, these air packs, from Alpine County through a Homeland Defense Grant Fund, which is something that was generated after 9/11. Since the original 1981 NFPA standards for air packs, since that time when we originally got the air packs, the standards were in place that the devices could, have a certain amount of air within the bottle. There's a carbon fiberglass wrapped bottle that's lighter weight, it holds more air. But since the 81 standards came out, technology's changed quite a bit, and so we're seeing requirements being revised as of 2013, or I should say recommendations, not requirements, that change in certain areas that make the device a little bit more safer to use. And some of those changes are changing the low air alarm system from previously it was 25%, the low air alarm would come on in the air pack. Now they want to change that to 33%, meaning giving the firefighter more time to know that you're running out of air. The buddy breather device within the air pack, it's a secondary hose that some of the older air packs didn't have. Again, it's a safety issue. If your air pack fails, you could go and assist the fellow firefighter with the buddy breather device or connection. Face pieces are now, the material and the plastics are getting better. Previously, there was thermal degradation with the face pieces, and so now they're becoming more strong, the plastic's getting better. There's a LED indicator within the air mask. Again, the new standards are allowing the firefighter to see the amount of gas left, or air left in their air bottles, to help them, know where they are. And then finally, the newer technologies allow for better voice communication. When you have the face piece on, it's really difficult to communicate with each other or talk on the radio. So because of the new changes and the better types of equipments, the regional fire chiefs reached out to all the different agencies, Lake Valley, South Lake, Fallen Leaf, Eastern Alpine County, as well as Kirkwood Fire, to say, hey, we'd like to submit a grant, an assistance firefighters grant, with the government to upgrade our air packs to make them all uniform. So in the event that we have a mutual aid incident, everybody will be, talking the same language. There are different companies that make different packs. Our air packs right now are made by Survivair. And I think the intent here is, if a grant is received, that we would purchase a grant that's similar to East Fork Fire Protection District, which is in Douglas County, which is currently using a Scott air pack product. And the hope is that if we have all the same air packs, if we have a large event, we can share air bottles, which will help us get through the event a little bit quicker and easier. So before you in the board's package, just general information on this grant. Again, there's no obligation, which is listed in the letter from Chief Gareth Harris at Lake Valley Fire Protection District on page 87, an email basically saying, we'd like to include you in the grant. In years past, we've included you under just a head nod that, yeah, add us to the list, but this year the federal government said we need an MOU with different agencies saying, hey, we'd like to be included, but there's no obligation. If the grant is awarded to the Kirkwood Volunteer Fire Department and as well as the other fire departments, then at that time I would come back to the board and say, okay, if we decide to receive the funds, then the district would be, or the fire department would be asked to put up either 10 or 12% to help pay for the grant. So again, this is an information report. We don't know if we'll receive the grant, but if we do, we'll definitely come back to your committee and to the board to ask for either the 10 or 12%, or depending on whatever the grant funding might be, the mechanism might be at the time. So unless there's any other questions from the board, again, that would conclude my report.
Hey, Rick, we mentioned this in the committee, but would we know in time to have this as an option, as a target for the barbecue donations?
Yeah, Carolyn Scott brought that up, that maybe this would be a good fundraising activity, maybe dedicate a certain amount of funds during the barbecue for this grant if we receive it.
Will we know soon enough to know that the grant's been granted?
Unfortunately, I don't know what the timeline is. Generally, I won't hear about grants being awarded until July, August, September, usually later. Probably next fiscal year is when we'll know whether we received it or not. So.
Okay, thanks.
Any questions, comments from the audience on this? Thank you, Rick. Okay, so moving on to performance report discussion. This is agenda item 8I, discussion with possible action related to the district's research efforts to improve the efficiencies and minimizes the losses of each department as measured in performance reporting. Manager Sharp.
Following an update to our district's efforts in identifying and resolving electric system losses for the period of November 1st, 2014 through December 31st, 2014, or the time that we have been connected to the grid, electric system losses has amounted to 400,000 kilowatt hours, or 21% of total production. The industry standard for electric system losses is 8 to 12%. This district would fall on the higher side of this average, as most utilities do not have two large transformers and 26 miles of transmission line after the Cal ISO meter. For the 2013-14 fiscal year, operating the powerhouse, the district's electric system losses total 1.5 million, or 19.26% of total production. Based on the district's average cost of electricity from CalISO, this represents a cost of $24,000 to the district for this 2-month period. Considering a beginning goal of reducing electric system loss to 12% of total production, the district needs to reduce losses by about 177,000 or 88,000 kilowatt hours per month. In order to identify the source of the loss, district staff has identified known areas, which are the KM Green transformer, KM Green house usage, KM Green equipment, the 34 kV line loss, the KM Blue transformer, blue equipment, powerhouse usage, step-up transformers, distribution line loss, and distribution transformers. These are all users of electricity that are not metered. Exponential engineering has regrouped these and identified the losses into 4 categories and estimated the losses for each. Transmission system losses, that would be between KM Green and KM Blue, amounts to 3% of total production. Distribution systems at 6%, that's everything from KM Blue into the district. Powerhouse usage at 2,500 kilowatt hours per month, and the powerhouse transformers at 8,600 per month.
Michael, these are measurements or models?
These are estimates of line loss.
Okay.
This leads 211,000 kilowatt hours of system losses for these 2 months, which are unidentified. So we've identified these 4 categories. This leaves the balance that are unidentified and are either potential unmetered usage or incorrect metering. In order to reduce this number and reach the district's goal, the following action has been taken. The district is checking CT multipliers in the field to compare to the billing software. These are multipliers on large commercial that multiply the actual usage by a given amount to come up with the actual usage. Checking the commercial meter reads for accuracy and corresponding with other utilities. If a commercial activity has a large water bill but doesn't have a large electric bill, that's a flag that maybe there's something wrong with that electric usage. Checking the accuracy of the wastewater treatment plant meter. That's not a census meter, that's a digital meter that was put in several years ago. The wastewater treatment plant and its corresponding electrical is a large user, and we'd like to make sure that that's accurately reflecting. Resolve the problem in the powerhouse meter. That accuracy has been off since we've been on the Out Valley project. Confirm that water tanks are metered and billed. This is a small item, but we're looking for every kilowatt hour that we can find. Confirm that the propane vaporizer meter reads and is included in the billed usage. Resolve unassigned meters in PCS. There's a number of meters in PCS that are recording usage but aren't even part of the billing system. That could be things like the absorption beds. Those are on meters, but of course you wouldn't bill for the usage going through the absorption beds. But we're identifying those to find out exactly what are these unassigned meters and usage. Comparing the manual read of all the meters to the remote reads. So we're going out in the fields, taking the manual read and comparing that with what we're getting from the billing system. And then checking the commercial accounts for historical usage and usage trends through these years. So those are the action items current. Some of the actions that we've actually identified that are open are listed here, and these are different meters that will be checked into, and these are the things that we found so far. Mountain Club electric usage for all the condo looks low to similar usages, especially since there's 48 units in the Mountain Club. So we're looking at those. We have identified and dismissed several items. Chairs 3 and 4 didn't show usage for a period, and we have confirmed that they weren't operating during that time. Dankberg water tank remote read was installed and confirmed. District is looking at further action. Exponential is checking the relays. This is a component at the powerhouse, and the feeders to see if we have the ability to total kilowatt hours at the powerhouse. This would be absolutely huge, because then we could say that it's not it's an actual read in between KM green, KM blue, or it's on one of the feeders and the problem is in the distribution system. It is staff's hope that the problem is actually in the distribution system and isn't in the transmission system, because that would be something that would be a just is thing rather than something that we could go out and fix. If the powerhouse relays cannot totalize the kilowatt hours, then installing meters at these locations may be necessary, may be advisable. It will cost approximately $10,000 a feeder to put meters in at the powerhouse on each of the feeders if our relays don't have the ability. If we do that and we decide that we'd like to see additional meters out in the field, that would cost $40,000 per meter. It's much more expensive to put it into out in the field, because you have to build a box, you have to bring the legs over to it. So it's much more expensive to do it in the field, but that might be advisory if you find that one of the feeds is producing the problem, but you still can't identify it. You might need to shorten that problem down even further by putting the meter midway through. And then contact Emerson for a proposal to check the meters that I talked about earlier at the wastewater treatment plant, at Chair 1, Sun Meadows, Pump House, etc., and check for their accuracy. Emerson is the same people that we had out when we originally took over Mountain Utilities, and they were able to find many issues like Renwick that we had, Mountain Club, Meadowstone, that we've corrected in the past.
Are these temporary meters or permanent meters?
Permanent meters. We don't know of any temporary meters that you can actually install and move around on three-phase electric. So we've also changed the form itself. So there was some confusion over those budgets and what is our actual losses. So we wanted to put it up right up front and say, here's total production, here's the meter, the system losses are 23%. Now we've identified some of these system losses. They're still system losses, but we've identified in terms what these are, and we'd like to, finalize those numbers by hopefully getting meters at the powerhouse so that we can really identify which of these are transmission or distribution. Total identified system losses are shown. Total identified system percentage, which is 9.66, is shown, and then the unidentified system losses, and then the unidentified system loss percentage is shown. So I think it's a much better, and it kind of points you in the direction of your goal. We had a very good operations and capital meeting, and they evaluated this information and gave some additional input. They asked that we evaluate line loss as a revenue rather than a cost, on what we're losing as far as revenue production rather than the cost to the district. They advised to minimize the use at the powerhouse now that it's in standby mode, and we're doing things already, but that's a good reminder. We did some rephrasing of a date range that caused some confusion in the meeting. There was a suggestion that if we do decide to put meters in at the powerhouse, to not do all three at one time, but just do one at a time, see if that solves the issue. Maybe do the lift feeder first, and then you can identify that you've got 1/3 of it. And evaluate charging customers for line loss on long service runs. In the industry, if you have a long service run, you can actually charge a customer for a calculated line loss due to that long service run. Examples of that would be the backside, Kirkwood Inn, and Cables. District staff will continue to consider this a priority issue and return with reports to the Operations Capital Committee and to the board as needed with updates. Next month, staff will make a presentation on water and wastewater performance reporting. And with that, I turn it over for questions and discussion.
Yeah, just to clarify what Michael said on the revenue versus expense, obviously if there's losses, say, coming up the Highway 88, that's, we're paying 6 cents a kilowatt hour for something that, we're not able to charge for. But if what we're missing is something on a customer side at a meter or something, we're losing a lot more than 6 cents a kilowatt hour. We're losing 68 cents a kilowatt hour at this point.
And related to that, house usage such as powerhouse or absorption beds, do we not charge ourselves for that? Do we get a free ride on that, I guess is the question.
The electric system doesn't charge itself, but water, wastewater, all the other departments charge electric. So house,
You pay electric.
you pay electric,
Okay,
excuse me,
right.
yeah.
So
if-
we don't get we're not giving ourselves a free ride on the absorption beds. We are giving ourselves a free ride on the powerhouse.
That is correct. And so water doesn't pay for water, but electricity pays for water, as an example.
Okay. But, so we should figure out what identified sources, even if we're not billing for them, like powerhouse usage, and measure that separately.
Yes, and that is on the graph.
Okay. Separately, when you use the word transmission, I assume you're referring to up to KM Blue, and distribution is from the powerhouse to the rest of the valley?
Yes.
Okay. Well, then I'd like to come back to you on the revised press release, where you added in distribution, we built a distribution line. And I'll do that offline, because we didn't build the distribution line. I left it in because I looked up what's distribution on the internet, and technically distribution can be up to 35 kilovolts. So I left it in, and now we should take it out to be consistent, I think.
The only thing I want to add is I just say, because I complained a lot a month ago, I'm very pleased with the amount of progress you've made in 1 month, so that's great.
I'll be more pleased when we do the general manager's MBOs for the next year, and we have a 12% goal in there.
I'll be more pleased when we're matching that goal and we're trying to reduce that.
One step at a time.
You know, when will you be pleased? Oh, okay.
At 20%, at 23%, I'm kind of unhappy.
Yeah.
Any questions, comments from the audience on this? Okay, so no actions necessary. This is an update. We'll come back with other departments in the next meeting.
I'd like to thank Dave Brightley for participating today and appreciate you taking your Saturday morning with us.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
You're welcome, and everybody have a good rest of their day. Bye.
So moving on to 8J, presentation and possible action related to the district's progress on researching an alternative method for calculating electric capital connection fees.
District staff has spent quite a bit of time on this time. I think we've made some progress. The district has been researching altering the method in which we calculate electric connection charges to new development. Currently, the district calculates the estimated cost of capacity improvements needed through build-out, divides this by the total remaining number of units to be built, and to calculate this charge. This is the typical method in the industry. Director Rickard has developed an additional charge to include the cost of the Out Valley project, less capacity and district's own use, which would be added to the existing electric capital connection fee. This method attempts to fairly distribute the cost of Out Valley project amongst all ratepayers, current, near-term, and future. This additional charge, or standardized based methodology, which is the new term, would be a one-time charge to reflect the years of benefit a property would receive by being connected to the Out Valley system. The amount of the fee would be based on when the new owner hooked into the system so that they fairly pay the cost through a combination of the standardized based methodology and the regular rate charges. Based on the assumptions used, this standardized based methodology amounted to approximately $500 per unit per year of benefit for the first 30 years and then decrease thereafter. The board directed staff to hire Kennedy Jenks to review both the way the district currently calculates capital connection fees and the standardized base methodology. At the December meeting, Alan Zelenka from Kennedy James presented a version very similar to the SBM, but used a 35 project life instead of a 60-year project life. The board directed this issue back to the Finance Committee to work on the assumptions. Staff has reviewed the assumptions and have the following comments. So we looked at the assumptions, and the cost of the project. We're using a current project cost of $38 million. We updated the term that we used is 60 years. We stuck with the 60 years for a couple of reasons, and I'll get to those. EDU is a real important issue here. I think the SBM actually used a percentage of what commercial amounted to the total production. EDU is actually defined as the average annual electric usage of a residential unit. This concept is an industry standard and is currently used for the connection capital charges calculation by the district's water and wastewater departments. The rate of growth for the EDU the last 3 years in the two other studies, it used a 2.5% rate of growth. During the last 3 years, as far as number of customers and growth, we've had a 0.35 percentage rate growth. For this study, we used a 1% growth rate is assumed. So what we did is we calculated the existing EDUs. Currently, there are 664 units. Every residential unit is an EDU, so thereby we have 664 existing residential. Using their average usage of 2,551 kilowatts per year, there are 1,762 commercial EDUs for a total of 2,426. Now, we have to determine what the EDUs at build-out is, so we had to determine what the kilowatt hours at build-out. The specific plan estimates 22 million kilowatt hours at build-out. Currently, we are at 6.4 right now, so we're about 50% build-out on residential, we're about 70% build-out on commercial. To reach 22 million is a stretch. For this study, we used 11 million kilowatt hours. Then we went to EDUs at build-out. Using that assumption, residential EDUs is pretty easy. There's 1,413 in the specific plan. If you take an allocation for 130 commercial units, you come up with 1,283 residential, and then using the 11 million kilowatt hour number at build-out, there would be 4,312 EDUs at build-out, 1,283 for commercial, and 3,029 for commercial, 1,283 for residential, and 3,029 for commercial, with 1,267 to be built. Also, we researched a troubling item is that what you would do with these funds once you collected them. You have to use them for capacity, and we found that we could actually use them for the maintenance of the out-valley line. And to quote, that they can be used to pay off debt, of course, and they can be used to refurbish existing facilities to maintain the existing level of service. So we could actually use collected funds for the maintenance of the out-valley, which is absolutely huge. So at the Finance Committee, we presented some sort of a beginning information. There was a whole bunch of questions, and the Finance Committee asked us to come back and show a graph that shows a chart showing all three methods of assumptions and a narrative on how and why each were derived, to produce a spreadsheet with each of the three different methods and distribute to the committee to show how they actually are shown. And staff is going to develop a timeline with the goal of having this change in force by July 1st of 2015. So staff recommends that we continue to work on this and present a full comparative model at the next Finance Committee, and also how this would affect existing overall capital connection rates. And with that, I open up discussion.
The only other thing we added on the finance committee worth mentioning is including inflation. Added on to that, so the time value of money isn't lost over time. Because over a 60-year period, using a 2015 dollar, 60 years from now, probably doesn't make sense.
Yeah, the only reason I didn't include that initially, I mean, I've lived out too, but is because our debt is fixed. It's not subject to inflation. It's a fixed cost.
That's a good point.
I think every other one of our services, with the exception of wastewater,
Okay.
there's one other service we have that's not indexed for inflation, and it has to do with water. Jim Manos.
Oh, yeah, it's irrigation and construction.
But I think everything else is indexed.
Yeah, no, I know,
But that's because the
because
costs
those
go with
costs
inflation.
actually do go
No,
up.
you're right, we need to factor in,
But
some
factor-
of these expenses go toward new things. They have to be built
Yeah,
in the future.
yeah, but that's the
So-
only reason why I didn't
Yeah, that
include
makes
it
sense.
initially.
So as far as that allowing for inflation, I think the portion that goes for the debt service, would be fixed, but the portion that goes for the maintaining of the project should be.
Yes, I agree with that.
So Standish, just to try to understand this subject, this could potentially impact current ratepayers as well as future.
Positively. It would save money for current.
As Timber Creek Lake developments come on board, arguably there's more money in the kitty and less money required of us existing ratepayers.
Okay, but there's not the anticipation that current ratepayers are going to see a one-time charge for this?
No,
They would see as savings.
Okay, all right.
No one-time charges.
the whole intention was to say that people coming in year 20, let's say, after we've paid off a lot of debt, and they've got all the rate benefit of that lesser debt, but they've got all the benefits of the system, they should be paying something at the time of connection to make up for that.
Got it. Thank you.
I have one question subsequent to our finance committee meeting. Does anybody realistically expect skiing to be happening in 60 years? And I direct that at you, Bob, because I think you sent me something a while ago saying very few people don't expect skiing, say in 2030, but very few people do expect it in 2050 at
Well,
our elevation.
The state's climate models show a very, very short ski season by 2050.
2050, so
And
that's
it would be more Sierra cement than
25
fresh
years
ash.
from now,
Yeah.
35 years from now. So is 60 years reasonable?
I think
Well,
there's
the
enough
benefit-
uncertainty in
The benefits of the system will last for 60 years, whether or not people will come in and develop and pay these connection fees. That's another question.
Any, sorry. Any comments or questions from the audience? Malia?
Do you have any idea what a fee might look like, say, in 2 years for someone to build a single-family home? Or, do you have any sense of that?
What the
connect to-
cost would be?
We have an existing connection fee, which is, why don't you explain that, and also what the incremental one would be?
Yeah, so right now our connection fees total around $10,000 per unit.
But that's not just electricity, that's everything.
No, that's all capital connection fees. And if you use the variance between the two models that are presented, that would increase, $500 next year and $1,000 the following year. So in 2 years, a person could look to paying $11,000, $12,000 for a capital connection fee.
Thanks, it helps me understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, and the preliminary models here, I think that, one of the approaches collected around $4 million, the other approach collected around $13 million. Preliminary look at this collects about midway in between, around $9 million, but that's
without inflation adjustment.
without inflation adjustment. That's just preliminary, envelope stuff.
And that's for the plus 3,000, whatever it is, EDUs.
Right, so that
So
if
each EDU would be subject to that charge, so it's not that much per EDU, basically, even out year 20, it's not that much.
And just a final comment is that I think that this would be something that could be reviewed annually to see, variances in growth rates and costs and be adjusted, and should be a living, flowing document that could be approved every year.
So moving on to 8, is there anything else from the audience on this? Judy?
Michael, I would really appreciate when you get your next document prepared that shows all 3 scenarios, if you would include the equations that you used and all of the assumptions with that data, because it would help me understand it a lot better.
Great, I'll make sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the audience or the board? 8K, discussion and possible action regarding the district's snow removal services operation, including a study of a valley-wide residential service. Manager Sharp.
District and the Finance Committee of the district has been investigating the possibility of changing the district's snow removal services program from a HOA contract-based service to a property-related service, much the same as the water and electric departments. Customers would receive a snow removal bill for their portion of the association, plus a driveway bill should they have one. The advantages of this change for the district is the ability to make long-term plans and investments with the knowledge of a steady revenue stream in the future. There's also a small savings in administrative costs by eliminating the HOA contract management. The objectives of this study developed by the Finance Committee are to maintain a consistent level of quality through the ability to do multi-year planning, to reduce the overhead for both customers and KMPUD through the elimination of annual contracts, and to apply any savings to reduce current prices. Any plan to move forward would have to at least maintain or lower current rates to owners. And there's many action items which are shown up on the screen right now that we must take to complete this. We have completed taking measurements and producing a service area map. With the help of Bob Epstein, this data has been stored into the report server. Dick Shanahan has produced and revised the rules resolution, and each lot, it has been determined that each lot would have a snow removal charge, and determined that the snow removal for driveways would be a separate charge. The district has begun time tracking seat time again, and will be presenting this information to the Finance Committee and to the board once sufficient data is collected. Other steps, we've actually contacted various other municipalities that charge for snow removal. There's one in Tahoe, South Lake Tahoe charges, there's a couple in Mammoth, and that information is being digested and will be presented. We've calculated administrative savings, calculated possible price discounts, and of course looking at a multi-year budget is difficult due to the unknown snow amount, and the board may consider a backwards-looking rate schedule based on the previous year's snowfall, much the same as the fuel adjustment charge that we've talked about in the past. We had a good Finance Committee meeting. They had quite a few actions. We need to reword a section of the update to update a section on the time tracking is proportionate to the effort the district is putting forth rather than the size of the area. Staff to direct a policy of setting rates on an annual basis effective July 1st, looking back similar to an fuel adjustment practice. Staff produce price comparables showing net cost to customers, which possibly would be more accurate and a better presentation. Staff to clarify voting as one vote per APN, including duplexes. Staff to verify KMA numbers, and staff to scrub the overall numbers. So what we produced here is 2 charts. This slide shows the impact of the potential savings, considering an administrative savings of $10,000 and a discount of 10% due to the advantages of a long-term contract. And we just chose 4 different associations and what the The current revenue at the contract cost is the revised with the administrative discount and the revised with the administrative discount and the, and how that's per customer. And then the next slide shows what it would be on the contract itself basis. Staff recommends that the district proceed with this analysis and possibly hold a public hearing in March to discuss this with the community. And with that, I open it up to district comments and
My only question on this really was, why do we, I mean, we're showing possibly a 10% discount, but, I mean, is that just, I mean, is that realistic, I guess? I mean, you've already taken out the administrative savings, so how could we afford a discount beyond that, I guess is what I'm wondering.
I think there is a benefit. I think there's a monetary benefit to a long-term, knowing that you have long-term contracts, you can enter into an agreement with, like to buy a snow blower, and I put an inference is having a record year like 2010-11, raising your rates to cover for that record year, purchasing additional equipment like an RPM snow blower, and then having competitors come in and take 25% of your business. That's the model that we're trying to avoid. And I think that there is a monetary value of long-term contracts, and that's why, at this preliminary state, that we would forecast some sort of a discount.
Well, I just would, as we talk about this further, I'd like to understand that more because, we're operating at what our costs are. That's what we're doing today. It is what our costs are. So to the extent that our actual costs can go down, we should hopefully be able to bring the rates down as well. But then a discount, I always think of discounts as an entity willing to give up some profit for the certainty of the revenue. But we don't have profit in here. So that's just a question.
Are you funding for equipment depreciation at all?
Yes.
Okay.
In both models, Peter,
Okay.
in both the contracts, so that's stated.
And it's easier to do that if you have a guaranteed base.
So Eric, I mean, we considered this at the finance committee, but what is your reaction to these rates? The prior slide. I mean, we pay in East Meadows $600 a quarter, that's $2,400 a year. We're told that 70%, I think it's 80%, 70% goes to snow removal. Looks to me like $744 goes to snow removal.
Plus the cost of driveways, that's excluding the cost of driveways, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Right, I mean, to me, it looked reasonable. I mean, the reason East Meadows is higher than the others is because I guess we have fewer lots or more square feet of pavement per lot. So that's why that happens.
Yeah. I thought it looked like a reasonably good deal for the,
I think it's all going in the right direction. I mean, obviously the homeowners or the property owners will decide whether or not this makes sense in the end, but to me, it's looking like it's going in an interesting direction.
Yeah, to me, that 10%, because I was pushing for it, is if this were a for-profit business, you say, is there a value in having a 3-year contract versus a 1-year, and there is. And so we would take that as the challenge to say, how do we deliver the same quality of service and save 10% either on labor or whatever, whether it's investments. That would be our challenge.
Yeah, okay.
To do it. It's worth something.
right.
Right.
Any other comments, questions from either the board or the audience?
From the standpoint of homeowners associations, it would be very difficult to complete this process this year in time for us to budget. We have to budget in April. And so getting through the entire process, suppose that the homeowners all voted for this, everything was peachy keen, I don't think we'd be ready to budget in April just due to the process. So we might need to slow it down a little bit based on that. We're not the only association west of us
Yeah.
in April.
I mean, that is a concern, that the possibility might be to move it to go into effect 1 year later, as opposed to dragging it out. But the feasibility of getting it implemented in time is one of the questions, certainly. But I would certainly like to get to a yes or no, and then pick a implementation date that works for everybody.
I'm just curious, I think you said there would be an element in the contract to use past years of snowfall to adjust the fees.
Excuse me?
But even in years where, heaven forbid, there would be like no snowfall, there still would be a base fee, which is what the advantage would be to the contractor. There would be like an administrative fee or something.
Right.
Yeah.
It's all based on our costs, so if we, heaven forbid, have no snow, we wouldn't have much operations costs, we'd still have administrative costs. Depreciation costs is pretty much.
I'm curious about this because I belong to a very small road association that we pay for, snow plowing, but like last year, we've got a huge budget surplus because there was none, so it's just interesting. Thank you.
So Stan, just, and Michael actually addressed that in the annual contract, just using KMA as an example, I mean, our net contract this year is $69,070. So it'll be interesting to see how that looks, and then eventually where the decision is made regarding rates. Because there is a difference, not a whole lot of difference to an individual property owner, but there is a difference. And then I would like to say that I appreciate the district recognizing that there are those duplex lots over on the west side there, and most of them do have two separate owners, and two separate AP numbers.
And we also had the problem that there are timeshares with 8 owners, but they only get 1 vote.
Anything else you want to?
But a timeshare doesn't pay property taxes, do they? I don't think they pay property taxes. They do?
Well, sure, yeah,
Oh, okay.
everybody pays property, except we don't. But everybody else.
Is there anything else on 8K, snow removal, that you want to cover at this point, Michael?
So basically, we'll be bringing the full model back to the board, and then hopefully, we'll have enough information where we can hold a public hearing and, ask members of the public to, review and comment
And when do you anticipate that?
in our March meeting. So I plan to, begin that socialization. As long as we feel that we're on the right path here, I'm going to start reaching out to associations and, developing interest and hopefully attendance at that March meeting and getting input from the public. But until this time, I just want to make sure that we seem to have enough meetings where we seem to be on the right direction.
I think you're on the right direction and would and have encouraged you to reach out to the HOAs sooner rather than later.
Sure.
8L, discussion of possible action related to the district's efforts related to the Caples Lake water rights application with the State Water Board and Department of Public Health. And you'll be relieved to know this is the last agenda item under 8.
Thank you. The intent of this communication is to clarify the duration of a water right permit, to provide an overall update with the timeline and possible action items should the board decide to proceed with the district's pursuit of Caples Lake water rights. Water right permit clarification. Pursuant to the December 12th meeting and discussion of water rights, clarification has been requested on the notion that a water right, once secure, has a term limit and is classified as a use it or lose it. All water right permits are issued for a specific time, typically 15 years, in which a permittee has the right to construct certain improvements and use the water listed in the project description. In order to obtain a permit, the district would need to demonstrate to the State Water Resources Board that it intends to initiate the construction of the works required for this and of the contemplated use of water within a reasonable time frame, and then diligently pursue that use. From the time the permit is issued, you have to issue annual progress reports, which need to be filed with the State Resources Control Board. If the project is completed within the 15-year time frame and the district has used the total amount of money or water that it wants to, then we would ask for an inspection, and the permit would actually be turned into a license. License are for an indefinite period and is valid as long as you continue to use the water. If the construction of the project has not been completed within 15 years, or the district is not using the amount of water that it intends to, the district could consider an extension of that. Extensions are granted typically for a period of up to 10 years. Any construction activities that need to be done within that 10 years have to follow the same CEQA rules as the original permit. So basically, these permits are for a period of 15 years. You have to show, you demonstrate reasonable progress towards achieving your goal, and you can file for extensions of up to 10 years. Once you make that call and say we want a license, then your water use at that point is, that's what you're based on. So if you're using 130 acre feet or whatever, that's what you're permitted for, and you can continue to have that license for perpetuity as long as you continue to use the water. I'll pause there and see if there's any questions about the water right permit clarification.
Any questions from the board or the audience?
The project description, the first step for a water right permit is the project description. It's a physical description of the project. It's a description and capacity of the surface water treatment plant. That's the major component of this project. And it provides information and a timeline on when water would actually be drawn out of Caples Lake. At the December 12th board meeting, the board approved a proposal from Bennett Engineering to produce the project description. He's working on it now, and we look at it to be completed by the end of January. By the end of January, we should have that distributed to the planning committee for comment and then to the board for possible approval. I'm going to go into environmental review. The second analysis which is needed with the permit is the CEQA review of the proposed project. As the lead CEQA agency, the district has the responsibility to determine if the project is exempt under CEQA or if an initial study has to be completed. Based on the preliminary project description, it's hoped that the project would qualify for an exemption, which would cost approximately $4,200. Should the board determine that it qualifies for an exemption, a notice of exemption would be prepared and posted with a minimum 30-day filing period of any protests. One possible strategy for the board would be to go ahead and file an exemption, see if there's any protest received, and then if not, continue on, or if a protest received, make a decision on if it wants to initiate an initial study. There is a possibility that it could receive a protest, as this would be seen as an expansion of use. It is, some of the work would be within a wetland, like at well number 2. However, the project description is being formulated so that water treatment plant would sit within the same disturbance as well number 2 to minimize any disturbance of the wetland. If the district chooses not to pursue an exemption, the next step would be to determine the significant environmental impacts, and that would be initiating an initial study. Initial study includes preliminary consultation and meetings, and based on the results, the board and the secret document would either declare that a neg deck, that there is no impact or potential impact or significant impact to the project, that there is impact but they can be mitigated, or that there is significant impact and an EIR would have to be prepared. The the approximate cost of the initial study is $16,000. If the initial study determines that a neg deck or a mitigated neg deck is done, then the cost to complete that is $2,500. If the initial study suggests that an EIR report is needed, then a cost estimate would be prepared for the board. So at this point, there's no direction. At this point, we don't have the project description, but I wanted to outline the different steps of the environmental so that you'd have an understanding when we bring that back at the next meeting. Any questions at this point on that aspect?
I assume that a notice of exemption would include a narrative that sets the whole thing in context, right? I mean, the court settlement regarding the 200 acre feet for upcountry uses, the specific plan that already has been approved by all the counties that's in place about what development is permitted up here in Kirkwood and so on.
So the environmental would deal more with the project, but we would refer to the project description. The project description have all of those elements.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions from the board? Lynn?
I'm just curious what the ultimate goal of the project is. To have more drinking water available?
Yes, yes. So the overall, that's exactly it. Our calculations is that we don't have enough water for build out, and I'll get into that further on in the report.
Okay, thank you.
You'll get into that what?
Further on in the report.
Okay.
So the permit process, once the project description and the environmental review analysis are complete, then we can gather and compile the balance of the information needed to submit the permit. And Nick estimates it'll take about 4 weeks to put this together, including a site review and a meeting with the SWRCB. The permit would be submitted to the board for approval prior to. Once the application is filed, it would take between 18 and 32 months for the permit to actually be issued, depending on protest. So initial cost to date for the Caples White water project, I think the board will remember that we approved a $10,000 expenditures with Steve Volker back to research our legal rights on filing. We also authorized Matt Wheeler to do a water source study, and as detailed in your packet, those are the two major costs of their expenditures of $21,000 to date. On August 9th, the board approved a budget of $50,000 to file a water right application. We've spent minimal money to that extent to date. That's also shown in your packet. And I'll move on to current status unless there's any questions.
Seeing none, please go.
It should be noted that the district's aquifer factor, and we draw our water from wells, so the aquifer is a huge, remains an unknown factor. After 3 years of drought, the district aquifer levels remained somewhat stable during the fall and the early winter that began to show effects of increased pumping as evidenced below, and you will notice that that in December 30th we reached the 99.7 level. A stage 2 water shortage is declared when we hit the 70 feet above wells 4 and 5, and a stage 3 significant water shortage is declared at 60 feet. A water emergency is declared at 50 feet. The district produces approximately 21 million gallons of 64 acre feet per year, and will need double that at build-out. The services capacity study completed this year discusses future water needs and is attached for your reference. I'll move on to alternative water sources. So in 2013, the district completed improvements to well 4 and 5 to increase groundwater capacity. Flow restrictions were removed. We increased the capacity for 4 and 5 from 85 GPM or up to 85 GPM, and changed some piping so that they could both be run at the same time, giving us 165 gallons per minute. The pump at well 2 was recently replaced, increasing that GPM from 80 to 130. Unfortunately, you can have all the GPM you want, but you only have a finite amount of water. Well number 3 can only be drawn for 3 to 4 hours a day until its production falls off. And during low, slow snow years, well number 2 is unusable for long periods due to its shallow depth construction. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the district investigated drilling additional wells in the valley, primarily on the south end. Through the research of Integrated Watershed Group, Robert Curry, 2 sites were developed into wells 4 and 5, which are the two wells we talked about. Additional aquifer soundings of these 2 wells indicate that these are both in the same aquifer basin, so that drilling additional wells right in that facility might not be productive. However, the watershed group felt that due to the geology of the valley, the groundwater course may flow to the east to the west rather than the more traditional thought of the south to the north. This theory is supported by Frederick Well Drilling, who's been drilling wells in Kirkwood for 30-some years. Using depth drops as a gauge, Frederick has identified 2 potential areas where exploratory wells could be drilled, both on the northwest side of the valley. So here's an indication, here's a picture, and it's also in your packet, of wells that have been drilled. And then if you look at the next one, that's the water course that has been identified from Caples Lake through the valley and moving on. And you can see the granite outcroppings on either side of that water course. Using that and a witching stick, I might call it, Frederick Pump has identified 2 different general locations where additional test wells could be drilled. One in the Chicken Feathers area and one near the number 1 well treatment facility where well number 1 used to be. One issue is that these locations are down gradient from the district's existing absorption beds, and the district is currently prohibited by the Department of Health Services from utilizing domestic water from these areas. However, the department may allow usage with increased testing, treatment, and or sanitary sealing depth requirements. The cost to drill a test well with a 400-foot target depth would run $40,000 to $50,000 each, and the cost to put a successful well into service, depending on the volume and size of the casing, would be approximately $100,000 to $200,000 each. So with that, I'll pause for questions again.
Questions from the board? From the audience?
So our estimated timeline and critical decisions in February, the next board meeting, we'd like to put forth the project description and possibly talk about a notice of exemption or initial study once we have that project description. Also in February, we'd like the approval to present that project description to the Department of Drinking Water for their review. If the board decides to move forward with Caples Lake water rights, the state board application would be filed in April or through October, depending on the environmental decision. In 2017, the permit is issued with conditions, and then between 17 and 2032, we'd make annual progress reports, and in 2032, the permit time elapses, and the board would need to make a decision on whether to petition for a license or request an extension. Recommended next steps. I think that we should complete the project description. We should initiate discussions with the Department of Drinking Water on the possibility of drilling test wells in the areas described. I think we should solicit a cost estimate to put in a pipeline on the snowmaking line.
Pipeline or slip line?
Slip line is what it is. So it would be slip lining the existing snowmaking line with a plastic slip line. So solicit an estimate so the board would know that cost. Solicit an estimate for the water treatment plant so that we would know exactly what that cost would be. Once the project description is approved by the board, distribute that to the Department of Drinking Water, CC, for their review and comment. There's no cost for that, and it would identify if there's any fatal flaws. And once the project description is approved, and with recommendation for our environmental people, to actually publish a notice of exemption because it actually doesn't have a real downside. If we receive a protest, then we can reevaluate. If we don't, then we have that in the bag. We had a planning committee meeting on 1/14. Other questions that will be asked was how long is the notice of exemption good for? Would adding any additional storage buy us additional time? We're going to verify the cost of a storage tank. This is along with our water capacity issue. Discuss with the Department of Drinking Water location of a storage tank if we just choose to go that way, possibly putting a storage tank on our property here at the wastewater treatment plant. We're waiting for a funding memo from Matt Wheeler as far as looking for grant sources for this type of work. We're also following up with Lynn Nolan, who's a local grant writing person, to find out her availability and for potential grants. We're also going to be looking at our existing will serve commitments to see exactly where we stand with our will serves, and we'll make a better presentation on historic aquifer level recap. And so with that, I conclude that very
Michael, on the will serve, can we apply the use it or lose it concept?
Yes, will serves are only good for a specific amount of time.
Okay.
We have researched that in the past because you file a will serve and then it just sits there. It's only good for a specific amount of time. And I think that's actually in the will serve letter, that this is good for 3 years or whatever it might be. But very good question.
Planning has considered this extensively. Is there anything
Yeah,
you'd
no,
like to add or subtract?
No, just that this set of next steps is very low cost set of next steps, and they're provided us with a lot more information for decisions, so we thought this was a good set of action items.
Any other questions, comments from the board?
I've got a list of questions when it comes to trying to pump water from Cable's Lake. Number one is how we're going to pay for it. It's the initial estimate to build it is $1.5 million. Where would we get that money?
Well, the $1.5 million isn't just for that, the $1.5 million.
Well, I understand.
Would go also for the storage and so on.
Well,
Treatment
it's
and
also
storage.
for surface water treatment, which is a whole new ballgame for
Right.
us. Where would the money come from?
You know, I don't even know when this is going to be necessary. I don't even know if we're going to do it. I mean, the answer to that is I don't know, and I also don't know if it's the right approach in the end versus the wells.
Well, that's why I'm concerned with spending any money on something that, to me, is a last resort when we haven't. It's much cheaper to drill wells and stay with groundwater treatment. I mean, we haven't even addressed I mean, there's an estimate of what it would cost to build it, but there's no estimate on what it would cost to operate it. I mean, I would have to assume that the electrical costs at 68 cents a kilowatt are going to be a lot higher than what they are now for just pumping out of the wells.
What's the elevation difference?
Well, it's the distance.
But you can recover the energy coming back downhill. So you can get about 80% efficiency there. So it's the elevation difference between the lake and where we're depositing the water as opposed to lifting it 200 feet.
Okay, well, this is.
Yeah,
this-
so that would
these
be the
are-
question.
These are factors that I
Right.
think that can.
Yeah, so just to,
we'd like to
again,
explore.
just to, I said this last month, and I've said it in the committee meetings. The intention, when we initiated this, when Michael and I initiated this a couple of years ago, it was simply that we're entering a drought period. We don't know the behavior of the aquifers. They may be fine or they may not be fine. There's a court settlement that allocates 200 acre-feet to upcountry uses with preference given to those uses in the counties of origin of the water. Well, in Alpine County, Caples Lake, I mean, there's only one upcountry user that will likely use anything close to that. That's us. So all we wanted to do was secure the right as a sort of an insurance policy against an aquifer dropping in one day 30 feet, which is what happened on December 30th. However, now we're getting to the bureaucratic features of all this, which is the use it or lose it. You know, you've got to go through the court settlement. When we started this, I thought the court settlement established our right. We just didn't know how much of the 200 acre feet, but established our right. Come to find out, that's not the case. We've got to go through this whole other process. So
You
just
gotta
to be,
spend money.
so just to be clear, I have no idea at this point whether I'm willing to vote to go through that process.
Right.
Because I just don't know enough. But these steps that Michael has outlined are essentially costless steps. So I think we should have that information, and it includes exploring the possibility of wells downslope from the absorption beds. So then we'll have a lot more information to consider.
So you're not talking about the $50,000 for the cost of application, right?
No, I mean, we're not gonna,
You're not
at this
talking about going to that.
point, we're spending the $5,500 on Matt Wheeler, which we approved last time, and that initially, and that's pretty much it. We're not doing, we may or may not decide to do the notice of exemption for $4,200.
Right.
But that's about it. And I can tell you that I started feeling complacent about this over the summer when our aquifer level was staying at 130, 125.
Right.
But then when I saw it drop 30 feet in one day, you realize what can happen. So I'm not feeling so complacent about it. I think that these steps are necessary steps, and they're reasonably costless. I mean, I realize it's staff time.
I'd love to hear your other questions that you put
Well,
together.
I mean, if we've got Matt Wheeler looking at it, I'd like to have him also look into how much it's going to cost to maintain the pipeline. I know that currently the resort, they send divers down every year prior to turning it on. So what's the cost of that? I mean, can you put in cameras in lieu of divers? I mean, they have to make sure that debris doesn't collect around the intake. They sent divers down, they checked it with the system off, then they turned the system on, and then they discovered they had a leak, so they sent divers down a second time to locate the leak. They decided not to fix the leak because the lake was starting to freeze over, and you'd have to have a hard hat diver going. I mean, you have to anticipate structural repairs in addition to just the liner of the pipeline. I just think that before we get too far into this, that we need to be kind of realistic. I mean, obviously there's this huge volume of water, but what are the costs to the ratepayers in terms of water rates if you have to maintain the system? And is it going to cost more to run? These are just factors that I think we need to really look at the big picture, and I got the sense at the last meeting that there was this push to hurry up, and it made me nervous. Okay?
My big push right now is to preserve cash.
Well,
So,
I agree.
so that's, and that's why these steps are good steps, because they don't consume cash.
So, just in reading the board material, I came to just adding up the numbers, according to this material, and it's all speculative, assuming we have to get more water source as the basis, we know the lake has water, and we think we probably have water in wells, but we don't know for sure.
Right.
Putting in 2 wells would be about $400,000, $300,000 to $400,000, and getting the water from a known source would be about $1 million. The other costs for storage and that you'd pay no matter what. So, to me, and then there's the operating costs, which it's $1 million for something you can see, or $400,000 for something you can't see but might be there. And that's one of the, and so understanding
It's
the
a gamble
financial.
either way.
It's a gamble either way, but it's understanding the degree of cost difference between the two, and just like I get comfort from having electricity either from the grid or diesel, having water from either a lake or underground is potentially more resilient than what we have now. So it's worth a little bit extra, but not a lot extra. And so understanding a cost comparison between the two, assuming they're both feasible, is something I think can be done in the concept of this. I mean, to a first order approximation. And that would inform me to sort of know, how should we think about this? Because we have to be able to provide water. And if we decide to go the next step after this and petition for our rights, we better be planning on building it.
Yeah.
Know that we're planning on building, and not just buying a 15-year insurance policy, because it doesn't sound like those are available.
It's a commitment. I mean,
It's
you have to be able to.
It's a
make that
commitment,
decision
it's
and
not a
commit to go
perfecting
on
of
it. Yeah.
rights.
Right.
It's an actual commitment.
Yeah, no,
I mean,
that's
that's
right.
what we know now that I didn't feel like I understood 3 months ago.
No, that's right. I agree with that. I guess the other question I have is ownership of the pipeline. How far what kind of progress has the planning committee made in terms of getting a commitment from the owner, the current owner of the pipeline?
Yeah. That's definitely a discussion that will have to be.
I mean, that's a
had.
serious
discussion, sure. No, it's one of those things that's probably, it may be a go, no-go kind of a thing.
And district staff, as recently as yesterday, I talked to Vail about the line and, the possible arrangements or agreements that we could have. I don't think the Department of Public Health would require us to own that line, but Vail would definitely require us to. If we didn't own it, then we would participate in the operations and maintenance of that line. I guarantee it. That would be those type
Well, I
of
could see
costs.
where that would be very problematic.
Yeah. 'Cause there's
Just from our experience with electricity and PG&E, and you
Yeah.
pay for this, and so.
No, there's all good concerns. I mean, absolutely.
All right.
There are good concerns, but I would like to voice a vote of support to continue with the project. I think, having that amount of water that you can see as opposed to drilling test wells is something we should pursue. And, I realize it's a $50,000 gamble. I'm not sure I feel obligated if we spend that money to go forward with the project with so many of the uncertainties such as ownership of the line and the permitting process and all that. I think we should grant the water if we can, which is a different view than what the rest of you have expressed.
Yeah, I'm a little on the fence. Yeah, I admit that.
Any input from the public on that?
I just have a question with the recent Proposition 1, the water bond. Is there would your grant writer be looking to see if there's any opportunity from that?
Exactly. Yeah, that's one of the 3 sources that we identified.
So the only other weird geological thing I'd throw out is the geologist that we had this summer speculated that the water actually flows from the lake underground into our aquifers, for what that's worth.
And that's exactly what that model shows.
In which case the lake's already supplying our water.
That
Just
is-
need to have the right.
But the state's not counting it.
What's that?
But the state's not counting it.
Yeah, right, that's right.
And we don't have to do surface water treatment on it.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
One of I call it the Curry corridor. Okay. And one of the theses is that it drains from Caples Lake and ends up at Martin's Point. That was Curry's thesis. There's a corridor that goes through the valley, east to west,
Okay. Well,
volcanic over granite.
since this is an ancient riverbed, here it would make sense that some amount of channeling.
And I know that there's an element of risk in drilling, but to my knowledge, Dr. Curry gave us 2 locations. We drilled twice. We were successful twice. So
hopefully his luck hasn't run out.
Roll the dice either way.
Yeah,
Okay.
I see what you're saying.
Anything else on water?
No, I think I did that.
So moving on to manager's reports, general manager report, including audit update.
So the district staff has been making presentations of the Out Valley project to Amador County, Alpine County, and on February 2nd, we'll be going down to Fair Services to give a presentation to them, and the actual forest supervisor, Lawrence Crabtree, he's going to be there. We're going to give out district water bottles just to say thank you for their support, because they've been super, and we'd like to see their continued support on our next project. So we'll be meeting with them. In your packet, you'll see a flow chart of the district personnel at this time. It shows we've been able to hire minimally for this winter season. We've only had to bring in a couple of snow removal staff people. The district staff has worked on a press release on the Out Valley project, and we're planning on sending that press release out to local agencies this next week. And another item that I was looking for consensus from the board is to bring back the item of the propane fence to protect our vaporizers, and possibly look at the other one, and I'd bring that back at the next meeting if that's the consensus of the board.
Sure, absolutely.
And the only other item is the additional compensation for the 2013-14 audit. As the board will remember, they came back and asked for an additional amount of $33,000. The district countered with an offer of $16,000 based on a 3-year payment schedule and some contingents. They came back with a counter saying they could not agree to the contingents because would make them partial. They need to stay impartial as far as the audit, and the district has agreed with their counter after consultation with the board president and the treasurer. And basically, we're on a 3-year, we half the amount at $16,000 over a 3-year payment schedule, and they get to continue being our auditor, which is huge, and they get to continue their impartiality. So it works out for all of us. And that's the end of my report, unless you have any questions for the general manager.
Questions from the board or the audience? Doesn't sound like it. Operations report?
So I have just 6 items, but they'll be really brief for operations. And that noise you heard just a few minutes ago was Careflight. They're going to be here today from 11 to 2 to do a static display public awareness, which is in conjunction to the Vail Resort's National Safety Week, or actually Safety Month, for the ski resort, for skiers and riders to ride responsible. But you'll see Careflight today, CalStar tomorrow, and then Amador County Sheriffs, Alpine County Sheriffs, and then Kirkwood Fire is also going to participate for a little while. Again, just showing off equipment and talking to the public. In the board's packet on page 144 is the current plant layout, and I'm just going to highlight some of the things that are going on over there. At this time, we're extremely pleased with the Coke membrane product. And it's done well for us. This Christmas holiday period, we actually flowed 122,500 gallons processed in the wastewater treatment plant without any incidents. So overall, the membranes are really doing a great job for us, and we're running them at the minimum level, except for peak times where they'll ramp up on their own, but they're performing well. Unfortunately, last Friday at 2 p.m., we had a power outage at our MCC2 panel, our motor control center. Power failure basically took out our battery backup supply, and it put us on high alert, try to figure out what was going on. Luckily, we were able to resupply the power for the system within the panel. But oh, I will? Okay, so I'll save on that event and let Derek talk about it. But long story short, the plant has been restored, and we have a couple more items as a result from that event that we have to resolve. And those 2 items are correcting what we think might be bad VFDs, or variable frequency drives, on the MLSS recycle feed pumps 1 and 3. Other than that, I'll let Derek kind of talk about those things in detail. But the John Deere generators, I know on the committee's packet on page 144 and also on the screen here, The John Deere number 3 is showing yellow, it's working, but it needs service. We actually had Michael Morse come up from Holt of California to evaluate our backup generation at the wastewater treatment plant. And the problem we were having is when both generators came online, there was a problem with the generators talking to each other to figure out which generator was going to take lead and which one was going to fall off and be lag. We've since corrected that by manually switching it to a primary generator. We can run on one generator to run the whole district facilities. And so really that should be a green, but we're going to continue to test the generators to make sure that they maintain and work properly for us. And then moving on, unless there's any questions about the plant from the board, for noise reduction, which is on 145, the board's packet. And there's 2 pictures on 145. In the back of the wastewater treatment plant, there's the older A-frame building, which used to be the fire station at once upon a time. Okay. Within that building, there are a couple, there's a digester and equalization blower that we use to introduce air into the process. And those blowers are extremely loud. If we walked in there during peak periods when we need a lot of air in our basins, you couldn't talk to each other. It's that loud. And that loud noise is carrying through the metal door, which is in the building, and obviously we had some complaints about that. So district staff attempted to put up a sound curtain, but because of the design of the building, the shape, heater that's in the roof area, ceiling area, it just wasn't working, so we've since taken that back down, and we're going to do a different soundproofing on that metal door from the inside, basically some foam sheets. However, the good news is that in the course of all this, we discovered that we really didn't need a flow or have these machines running at such a high level. So we've turned down the machines. It's still allowing our process to be, and our bugs to be happy, but also it takes that noise down so you can carry a conversation on mixing the machines, which I think will solve the problem as well. So 90% of the time, we'll keep the machines turned down. The other 10%, we're just going to have to crank them up, but hopefully the foam barriers will help us out. Moving on, in the board's packet, I'm pleased to announce that the 3-year survey from the EPA for lead and copper within the valley was good. We are well below the required levels for testing or further mitigation. The purpose of the testing is to protect the public health and minimize the lead and copper levels in drinking water, which is introduced through plumbing materials such as pipes and valves. And anybody's interested in going into the details of why we test, but I would be more happy to let them know. But bottom line is samples were good, and it shows that water level tests were, again, well below the action levels. As for the remote water read project, staff is moving forward as well on this project. And then since the board packet went out, we're actually down to 27 meters. I think it was listed 29. And of the remaining meters, there are 5 that are missing, either buried under snow or dirt out in the field, or within spaces within the buildings. Something that came up in the committees is I made a comment that we've got some meters possibly behind some drywall at the meadows. And as I was telling the committee, when the meters are installed, they're not a perfect meter bank, like you would hope. The meters can be stuffed anywhere. They can be put in attics, ceiling tiles, and for example, the Meadows garage, the meters are in the ceiling of the garage, and you have to remove the panel with a long ladder, get up, reach around some plumbing to try to get to the meter. And in the course of remodels and construction, meters get relocated and moved. So we're still trying to find five meters, a couple of them in the Meadows. We kind of know where they are. We have to narrow it down to put the remote meter device on there. And then we have 5 meters in the Mountain Club that are above the ticket office window. And if we try to pull those meters down, they're 2-inch meters, and put this device on it, it's going to create a flood, a mess, obviously impact business. So we're going to hold off on doing those repairs or replacements, rather, until the time is a little bit better. As for water, wastewater, that kind of ends that part. Unless there's any questions from the board, I'll move on to the fire department. Okay. On page 52 is actually it's the 2004 to 2014 call run survey. I apologize for the typo on the top right of that sheet there. But bottom line is, calls were slightly up to 115 calls last year. Thankful to say that medical calls were down, and all the other calls seem to continue to be about the same as they have been before. I think next year I will slightly modify this form to reflect some of our required NEFRS reporting. The format for this form was actually developed over 14 years ago, and so I think I could probably narrow down some of the calls a little bit better, just for reporting and for information. So you might see a change. You will see a change next year on that. And then finally, I wanted to mention we are grateful for Alpine County's contribution of a surplus fire department vehicle. It's a 1998 Ford Expedition, which came equipped with radios, light bar, and a command box, which is located in the back of the vehicle. We're going to dedicate this vehicle primarily to the Out Valley, and with the light bar, it's going to assist our staff out there on Highway 88 doing field inspections on the centralizing cabinets as well as the different Out Valley equipment. But also the vehicle could be used for any in-valley related emergency or event, and so again, we're thankful for the county for donating the vehicle. And unless there's any other questions from the board, that will conclude my report this time.
Hey. One, it's not really a question, it's a possible suggestion. So I have a Nest thermostat, and Nest now, owned by Google, has an API, so you can build stuff on top of it. And I don't know to what degree there might be interest in being able to have, with the homeowner's permission, they also have smoke detectors that have the alarms from those things go directly to the fire department, as opposed to just to the homeowner. If you have an alarm, maybe some alarm companies provide that and charge you for it. We don't have to charge anything. So if there might be interest in that, we could at least approach that. I don't mind writing the software. I just need to figure out whether somebody would actually want it or not, and whether it would work. And it would also give us the advantage we'd know if the heater's working or not. Right now, we detect it by the absence of propane usage on a cold day, but this would be more direct. So.
What are you suggesting? A Nest interface to the fire department?
To the fire department. With the homeowner would have to approve it, of course. But with that, then there's certain safety benefits.
I ask a question. So over the holiday period, I observed I'd say lots, but several ambulances coming into the valley. But it didn't seem like it really involved the fire department. So is that just generated via the resort, or I used to think that if an ambulance was needed or medical aid, it came through the fire department.
Essentially, the clinic, which Vail Resorts contracts through Barton Hospital, they own the clinic. When they're in full operation, i.e. there's a doctor, staff on board, any type of medical aid or resource that's needed for the clinic is considered an IFT, or inter-facility transport. Therefore, they don't need Kirkwood Fire EMTs coming in to help a doctor perform medical aid. So you'll see probably Lake Valley Medic 7, Medic 6 from South Lake Tahoe come in and do transports. Sometimes they come in code 3, usually lights and a siren. And like today with aircrafts coming in, they will call us. We'll come in for an aircraft and we'll land. And I think we had 14 events last year with aircraft involved. But the rest of the time, they're not going to call us unless they absolutely need the manpower or they need us to help do CPR or transport a patient in the back of an ambulance, and they need another person to be in the ambulance to go with them. So that's kind of how that works. And it's an agreement with Vail Resorts, Ski Patrol, the clinic staff, Mountain Valley EMS, our medical agency that supervises us or oversees our operations. They're aware of this, as well as Douglas and Alpine County Sheriff's Department.
Is there anything else on operations that you'd like to say?
Yeah, I'd like to introduce Derek Dornbrook. He's our water and wastewater superintendent. he had a tremendous role in our event last Friday, and I thought I'd give him an opportunity to explain what happened and what his reaction was. Derek?
Good morning. We had an incident at the wastewater treatment plant last Friday afternoon, I think January 9th, where we lost power to the main motor control cabinet. And essentially that cabinet controls the entire wastewater treatment plant, all the facilities in terms of pumps, blowers, and interfaces with our coke membrane control panel. I got called in around 2 p.m. For a power outage at that panel. At that time, district staff had already diagnosed that where the UPS battery backup plugs into an outlet, that outlet was actually dead. So at that point, we were able to bypass the UPS battery backup and get power back to that main motor control cabinet. But unfortunately, everything was in fault on that panel, and there's about 21 modules there. And we were unable to do the normal procedure of resetting that panel, and also the coke membrane panel, which controls the membrane part of the system, was completely down. It was the screen there was dark. You didn't see anything there. So at that point, we contacted Tesco Instrument Controls. They're our primary support for issues like this, and also coke membrane systems. And what we did was we disconnected every device net from the PLC at each module, and went through and reconnected and made to basically what happens when there's a power outage is that severe, is that all the addresses for each module are lost, and it gets the PLC gets confused. The PLC is a programmable logic controller. And the standard procedure that Tesco instructs us to do is to unplug each device net and go through and re-establish the address for each one, which is very time consuming. And we did that twice, power cycled everything. We were able to get a lot of the blowers and pumps to work, but unfortunately the coke membrane control panel was still down. At that point, we started to scramble a little bit because obviously we can't process wastewater. We're dead in the water at that point with no membrane. We looked at what we had in terms of emergency storage. Fortunately, we had a great deal of emergency storage, and just by doing the quick math there, we determined we could probably make it close to 5 days without processing wastewater with the emergency storage that we had currently on site, with the flows that we had. If it would have happened a couple weeks earlier during New Year's or Christmas, we would have had about 2.5 days. But our flows have gone down significantly since that time period was over. So Tesco was on the phone with us, working on trying to diagnose what was wrong with the coke membrane panel view displayer, which was dead. And over the phone, they diagnosed that it was most likely the panel itself had blown and needed to be replaced. Fortunately for us, they had one on the shelf, and they sent a programmer up that evening to reinstall it. So he actually determined the actual panel view displayer was fine, but the logic module behind it, which is basically the brain of the membrane system, was out. So he took the new logic module and put it on the old display panel, brought everything back online. Unfortunately, he was unable to extract the old programming from the old module. So we had a panel viewer, but it wasn't programmed. And at that point, we got a hold of Coke. It took a little bit of tracking people down, but we got somebody from Coke. They're on the East Coast, so they're obviously 3 hours later than us, so it's a little difficult. But we were able to get programming sent to us via my email, and Tesco was able to get the programming installed, and we were back online about 10 p.m. that night. So fortunately, everything went the way it was supposed to go. But if we hadn't have had that logic module on hand, we would have had to order one from Allen Bradley, which would have taken a couple of days. But fortunately, we did have emergency capacities to make it through probably through the weekend.
Well, thanks for that report and making it happen.
And also, just to follow up, Tesco came up on Monday, and we did find out what caused the power outage at that outlet. There's actually a fuse inside of an RFI surge suppressor on the panel there that we weren't even aware that fuse existed. It had gone out. We now have the ability to see if that goes out and causes the UPS module to go down. Tesco was able to reconfigure that alarm system to actually alarm out when this happens, so we'll avoid something like this happening in the future. We're also working on having spare parts on the shelf so that we can react much quicker in the future if we do have this problem in the future. But we received excellent support from Tesco and Coke Membrane Systems, so that was a relief. That was the first time we've had a real incident with the coke membrane system on a weekend in the evening. So it was nice that it was resolved quickly.
Great. Anything else? Thank you very much, Derek.
I'd just like to thank Derek. We don't have a backup wastewater treatment plant, so it's great that he and his staff, that we couldn't just go into the powerhouse. It doesn't work that way. So
There's plenty of
thanks.
storage there.
And thanks for recognizing us.
Thank you.
All of that.
Electric and propane, Brandy?
Hello again. I'll start with just a powerhouse standby update. As we talked earlier, currently the powerhouse generators don't come on automatically in the case of an out valley outage. So we have been staffing the powerhouse with an operator from the time of 6 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. during any lift operations. So we've got 2 shifts up there just to ensure the fastest possible restoration of power on generators, since it does take an operator at this time. Once Exponential finishes their reprogramming of the system, we are expecting to consolidate all of our folks into 1 shift a day, and we'll be able to leave the powerhouse unmanned at times, which is going to free up our staff to be able to do a lot more in the field and with the out valley inspections. We are exercising generators. Currently we're exercising them under no load, so we're keeping our exercising short, about 15 minutes a generator per week. And this is just to ensure that we keep the generators operational, but we don't do any unnecessary plugging of the DP filters. Once Exponential is finished with their reprogramming, we're expecting in February to be able to run these for longer periods under load. In addition to the powerhouse, we've been looking at the out valley inspections. We've completed 2 full inspections and started on a 3rd. Our inspection sheets have been changed a couple times and are in final form now, we think. And we've also updated the summary sheet that you guys saw earlier. We are keeping both paper records and scanning these into the network for now so that we have a good record of all of our out valley inspections. Another point that we have been working on is the powerhouse permit modification. On January 7th, Great Basin issued a temporary permit for us, which designates us as emergency standby generators at the powerhouse. We are allotted 100 hours per year per generator of non-emergency use. They've updated our record-keeping requirements, and they've also updated our compliance testing. This is actually a point of the permit that we're in active discussion with Great Basin on. The testing requirements right now require a rather extensive test every 4 years, with a shorter test, the cylinder gas audit that we've talked about before, every 2 years. So we've gone back to Great Basin with the potential cost of this and asked them to reconsider whether we might be able to test less frequently. Excuse me. And then lastly, load forecasting. I just wanted to show the board our load forecast for the month of December. Orange is the actual forecast, where red is the load we saw. And there are two colors. It is difficult. It was a challenging month for us. We had snowmaking in full operation if it was cold enough and all the equipment was working. We had the resort opening, and we also had the impact of the storm where Heavenly wasn't open for a time period, so we saw a lot higher demand than we expected to. So I'm happy to report that January is looking a little more on track, but we have been going along fine with Shell putting in these forecasts every day, and we haven't had any issues with submitting our load forecast.
How has this affected cost?
It's hard for me to say.
Yeah, so how it affects costs is that There's three different ways you could do. You could hedge it, you could do it, in advance. If you do day ahead, which is all about forecasting, then it's cheaper than actual, which is after the fact.
Right.
And so, but those two factors are pretty close as far as in relative. The cheapest that you can do is hedge, which we've done in the past. We actually started our hedging in January. So we don't have an actual dollar figure to give you today, just the results of what our hedging has been. Okay.
I guess, just as a follow-up question, like on, looks like December 30th, way over towards the right, where we were, the red is actual, right? The blue is the forecast.
Correct.
So we had forecast 2,100 kilowatt hours and, kilowatts. It actually happened at that spike of close to 3,000. So we had to go, Shell had to go buy power right for us.
Correct, off of the real-time market.
Off the real-time market.
Um,
Yeah, the question is on December 30th, was that pretty cheap or was it?
Right.
The answer is we don't know yet.
The answer is we do see, we get a breakdown from Shell with our monthly invoices, but I don't know right now. And if there are not any other questions, that concludes my report.
I think that would be good to understand what we're, either how we're doing financially in the day-ahead market as we gain experience. We're only, 2 months into operating this thing?
Yeah, the difference between what we hedge, day ahead, and real-time markets could be analyzed based on these, and they actually do that for us.
May I just ask a question on propane? Our last bill had a very nice credit on the propane, I assume because the cost of natural gas and propane are down. Are we continuing to see that kind of a trend in our propane purchases?
So,
Much lower cost than what our base rate would assume, right?
much lower.
5.5 cents the last 2 months.
I know, it's amazing. Last time we paid that was, I checked back in my records, I think it was 2003, 2004.
It was down below $1 a gallon.
Anything else on electric and propane from the audience? Administrative report. Jim.
Saving financials till 3.5 hours in.
I'd say make it quick, but go differently.
Yeah.
Maybe we should alter the order.
I can do this. Okay. I'll start with the balance sheet for November on page 168. The main thing to bring up on the balance sheet is obviously operating cash. For November, our operating cash is at about 1.8 million. It is down about 700,000 from plan. I'll go into this in more detail when we go over the cash waterfall, but we have discussed previously there's two main reasons for this. One is that capitalized interest from the RUS loan is being paid out of operating when it was previously being budgeted to be paid out of the capital funds. And then there's a timing issue with the COP loan payments. The budget assumed that those would be paid in December and June, and they're actually paid in September and March. Another thing to point out on the balance sheet, a large variance is in our accounts payable balance. The November balance is 2.5 million over budget. That's due to a large PG&E invoice that we've received, but as Michael and Michelle mentioned, it's not a true-up. So we have it on the books, but it's not been paid until we see the actual true-up on that. Unless there's questions, I'll go to the income statement.
Stand for Joe. I can't remember where it was brought up, but I thought at some point there was going to be some type of notations going to be made on some of these financials. Because if you're out in the community and you don't have the opportunity to participate, you look at some of these numbers and the reaction is, you're sitting on a lot of cash. And it should, and so with,
It's still the plan, we haven't gotten there yet.
oh, okay, so I was just wondering what
Stay
the,
tuned.
what the plan was and maybe the timeline for it.
Yeah, I'll get back to the finance committee on the time for annotating.
I wish we were sitting on more cash as well. God,
According to that article in the Tahoe News, we've got an extra 200 million.
yeah.
We just need to find it.
Time to go back to J school, I guess, but
For the income statement, the combined on page 170, our operating revenues are down from plan by 71,000 for November. Our operating expenses were also kept down. So our, for November, we are about 35,000 over plan. The largest reason for that, you can see in depreciation, it's under plan. The budget assumed that 100% of the Out Valley project would be completed and paid, and all of that would be being depreciated. As we've seen previously, there's still over $4 million that hasn't been paid, so since that's not on the books, we're not depreciating it yet.
So Jill, just to clarify, when you said $35,000 over, it's better than?
Better than,
Better
thank you.
than plan.
Yes. For year-to-date, we are 328,000 better than plan. The main reason for that, you can see in interest expense. With the Moss Adams audit, they had found that we were expensing more of the Out Valley during construction than should have been, so that a lot more of that has been capitalized. As of November 1st, all of the interest is being expensed. So this 249,000 is a true, I guess, savings on the income statement. Another variance is in our salary and wages year-to-date and payroll taxes, down from plan. The main reason for that is staff time being used on capital projects. And while that's not shown on the income statement, I do want to point out that the funds for that is being paid out of operating cash. For water, on page 175, I just wanted to point out there, for year-to-date expenses are under plan except for our contract services, and that's due to Matt Wheeler invoices more than we had anticipated for his support. For electric, our year-to-date is up 196,000 from plan. We have allocated 100% of property taxes to electric through November. We did a November Form 7 to check our tier ratio, and through November it's 1.3, mainly because of the interest expense savings. But there would be an option, we would look at December. We have to file the calendar year Form 7 with Russ in December. So if we are above that using all property taxes, the board could choose to reallocate some of those if we just want to hit the 1.05. It could be saved for possibly if the winter, if it doesn't snow, we may still need them for electric, but you wouldn't have to allocate them until the end of our fiscal year. Are there any questions on income statement, or we can talk about cash? The cash waterfall is on page 183, and at Finance Committee's request, we have made this go out to a full year, so it's going out till December 2015. In January 2015, we're projecting cash to be down 190,000. I'm going to go through just a couple of variances that we've talked about previously, but I'll put some numbers to them. Talking about the capitalized interest for Russ, as of December, there was a payment, and that was the last payment that we had any capitalized, any interest being capitalized. After going forward, it's all going to be expensed. But through December, $685,000 budgeted to be paid out of a capital account is being paid out of operating. So $685,000 is a true variance that wasn't planned for.
So that just is cash in our general fund.
It was cash that we planned on paying from the Russ Fund, the capital fund, that we were directed by Moss Adams to actually pay.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but since we didn't borrow enough to cover our costs, in the end, it's just going to come out of our general fund anyway. It was going to come out of the general fund anyway. Or out of the reserve.
Right.
One
In
or
our,
the other.
yeah, in our previous Out Valley expense tracking, it showed that we were over the Russ loan payment by more than the $680,000 that we're
Right.
showing today, and that's
Yeah.
due to
Yeah,
this.
so our overall cash position is no different. I mean, this is just
It
parsing
just
it out.
came
to
out
the
of a
general
different
fund.
bucket.
Correct.
Yeah,
Reserves look better and operating looks worse.
right.
As we've mentioned before, the COP loan payments were budgeted to be paid in December and June. So that's just a timing issue. That's $540,000. I would like to change that. On this cash waterfall for the budget number, I'm just using what was approved in last year's budget. I haven't made any adjustments to things that we know are issues, such as this timing. The budget also assumes that property taxes are being received in an accrual method, $71,000 a month. But in actual cash, this actual cash waterfall shows that it's being received annually in July and January, which is why January doesn't look as far down. We're assuming $450,000 will be received in January. As we've mentioned, or Eric brought up, that in December 2015, our operating cash does go down below $1 million. But do want to point out that if you look at plan, it's down $578,000 from plan. So if we take into account the $685,000 from the Russ interest, yes, it's bad, but I just wanted to point that out, that it does follow.
I guess, I mean, the question not to be answered here, the question is do we still have a target of maintaining a minimum of $2 million in the general fund? Or are we just throwing it out the window at this point because it doesn't seem very possible?
I definitely think that's a goal.
Well, it's a goal, but
How
I mean,
feasible?
but is it feasible is really my question. I mean, each month, the cash projections seem to be lower and lower and lower. It seems to be a trend. And I just don't know, I mean, is it going to reverse itself, particularly with this project that we have that we're going to have to pay money for, and the $800,000, $900,000 out of, over the Russ? And I mean,
To quote Standish,
Is it
I
real?
think he said, this will be a very rigorous budget planning year. I don't have
yeah.
that answer, but definitely with this budget, there's a lot of things that we know now that we didn't know last year. I don't know what the actual, what an updated goal would be. But we're definitely, for cash saving measures now, looking at capital expenses. For the next fiscal year, there's $230,000 budgeted to be used in capital. We're currently looking at that, to see what we can cut down. And already tightening our purchase order procedures, and always looking at current staffing to make sure those are the things right now that we're looking at.
I think that it'll be a board decision, and it'll go before finance as far as the balance between maintaining proper cash and reserve balances and reducing rate. You know, there is a balance there, and the finance and the board will struggle with that as we go.
Given all that, I mean, I have this burning question of whether we should accelerate the 2016-2020 budget planning timeline. I'm wondering if we could move it up a month, or if it would make sense, or be an inappropriate burden on staff. It seems to me there are a lot of variables this year. And the good news is, once we get our June 2015 audit, we should be hopefully more or less steady state, where we haven't been steady state since we acquired Mountain Utilities, frankly. So would it make sense to accelerate that? I'm also cognizant the last couple of years we kind of ran out of time. You know, in other words, we had the schedule like this, and we ran out of time.
Yeah, I think we can do that. I think that there would definitely be more than one version to look at, but we could do an initial, specifically, you know, if assumptions. We know a lot of those now,
Yeah.
and right after finance staff started looking at these
If we
things.
could accelerate everything a month, it would also fit with our ability to make an informed decision on any kind of rate changes, which might be positive, meaning less cost per kilowatt hour. If we get this depreciation thing, it might be less cost per kilowatt hour if we factor in what we've been talking about, Michael.
Wait, that's my copy.
Thanks, Michael. Well, staff will get started.
And I just want to respond to what Nancy said, you know, sitting out a lot of cash. So just to give you a sense of scale of this, the reason we chose about a year ago to target $2 million as a minimum is because that's only 1/4 of a year of operating expenses. That's only 3 months. That's it. So it's not a big old cushion.
Right, right, right.
Any other questions from board members, staff, or audience on financials? Let's try to get out of here by noon. Committee reports, communications.
We haven't met since the last one.
That's quick. Planning.
Just, we've covered most things. We focused on water and fire more than anything else. And just say that Rick is really going to start interacting with us a little bit more, I think, on the fire master plan and sources of funding for any expansions or improvements to the fire operations that we may need.
And finance.
We've covered everything because the main topics are the powerhouse, useful life, or capital connection fees and snow removal in the budget.
And operations.
It's been covered.
And personnel, we had a meeting in December to review a number of things, including the general manager's mid-year objectives, which are in the package. And I think we're feeling that, all things considered, Michael's making good progress on those yearly objectives. General discussions, the opportunity for board members to ask questions, for clarification, provide information to staff, committee updates, request staff to report back on a matter, or to direct staff to place a matter on a subsequent agenda. Does anybody have any? So unless there's anything else, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you for your time, thank you for your attention, thank you for coming.
Everybody.